Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the WMATA Executive Committee meeting of September 24th, 2020. I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for joining us today. Before we begin today's meetings, I'd like to ask Teresa Impastato, Metro's Chief Safety Officer, to provide us with this morning's safety contact. Ms. Impastato.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. National Preparedness Month is recognized each September to promote family and community disaster planning now and throughout the year. As our region continues to respond to COVID-19, there's no better time to be prepared for an emergency than now. The 2020 National Preparedness Month theme is Disasters Don't Wait, Make Your Plan Today. Talk to your loved ones about how you will communicate before, during, and after an emergency. Prepare an emergency kit that includes important documents, drinking water and food for your family and your pets, along with any critical medications. Make sure to update your emergency plan and kit based on the Centers for Disease Control recommendations due to the coronavirus. Visit ready.gov for more information about National Preparedness Month and for additional tips. This concludes today's Safety Contact.
Thank you, Ms. Impastato. Since we are meeting virtually today, I'd like to ask presenters and committee members and staff in all the committee meetings today, including the board meeting, that they introduce themselves with their name and title as they begin their presentations. I also request that members hold any questions or comments until the end of each presentation. I'll go round robin until there are no further questions or comments. Please mute while you are not speaking to help cut down on background noise. And finally, I'd like to note that alternate director Walter Alcorn will be filling in for Director Matt Letourneau today, as Matt is recuperating from an injury sustained while coaching his son's baseball team. And we wish him well in his speedy road to recovery, road to a speedy recovery. With that, I'd like to ask Ms. Ellison to please call the roll of board members. Ms. Ellison.
Thank you. Chair Smedberg.
Present.
Vice Chair Gideby.
Present.
Vice Chair Goldman.
Here.
Director Horner. I believe he was joining late today. Alternate Director Alcorn.
Here.
Alternate Director Meridian.
Here.
Director Slater.
Here.
And Director McMillan.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Our first order of business is to approve the agenda. If there are no objections, we'll consider the agenda approved as presented. Are there any objections today to today's agenda? Okay, thank you. Next, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. Are there any objections or comments to the minutes as presented? And you'll see them there before you, the meeting minutes of September 10th, 2020, and the minutes of September 10th, 2020 executive session. Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. With our administrative business out of the way, I'd like to briefly review the items on our agenda and note that they reflect the board's commitment to fostering equity in Metro services and programs. First, staff will present the 2020 update to Metro's Title VI program. The Title VI program is designed to ensure that Metro services and programs are provided equitably. As a recipient of federal dollars, WMATA must submit an updated plan approved by the board every 3 years. In addition to approving the program, today's presentation will provide us with a better understanding of the ways in which Metro advances equity as part of its mission, as well as identify opportunities for improvement. Next, staff will provide an overview of Metro's plan to update its bus service guidelines. This update, which is one of the recommendations of the bus transformation study completed earlier this year, will focus on how Metro can develop and implement these guidelines in context of advancing equity in transit. And the final item on today's agenda is an overview of Metro's customer communication and outreach efforts, including the various strategies that Metro uses to engage with its riders. Okay, so first with that said, we have our first agenda item, the Title VI program update. And I will turn it over to Ms. Bryant and Ms. Davis.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members
morning.
of the board. My name is Jan Bryant, and I am the current director of the Office of Equal Employment Opportunity, also known as OEO, around Metro. With me today is Ms. Allison Davis. She is the Director of Strategic Planning, Office of Planning, and she will be giving you information a little later on in this presentation about the board standards and how they work with service monitoring, and talk a little bit about the steps that have been taken by Metro under its transit equity framework. Next slide, please. Allison, next slide. Okay, we jumped ahead a little bit. So I'm before you today to seek board approval of the 2020 Title VI program and updates and the service monitoring results. Next slide. As the chairman mentioned, Metro is a recipient of federal financial assistance and is required to comply with the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. What that means is any recipient of federal financial assistance is prohibited from denying any person the participation in, the benefit of, or be subject to discrimination in any program or activity based on race, color, or national origin. The purpose of Title VI is twofold, and that is to eliminate discrimination in federally funded programs and activities, and to ensure equitable distribution of public funds for the public benefit. To ensure compliance with Title VI, the Federal Transit Administration published a circular which sets out very specific requirements that must be included in a Title VI plan in order for it to be approved by FTA. Next slide, please. Metro has demonstrated its commitment to the principles of Title VI and to providing transit services in an equitable manner. The way it has done this is by establishing board-approved system-wide standards and policies for both bus and rail. It has defined for the purposes of an equity analysis what is a major service change, and it has defined thresholds to determine when there would be a disparate impact on minority communities or disproportionate burden on low-income persons when they are making major service changes. Metro also updates its Title VI complaint procedures, its public participation plan, and the LEP language assistance plan. These are all part of the total Title VI program and are required to be updated by the federal circular. Next slide, please. So since we last submitted a plan to FTA in 2017, there have been no major programmatic changes. What we have before you are the requirements of the circular along with the updates of the demographic information and survey data, of the language assistance plan, the service monitoring of Metro services to ensure that it meets the standards that the board has adopted, updating and enhancing the Title VI complaint process, and updating the public participation plan and its outreach activities. Next slide, please. So this slide is a comparison of the customer demographics from 2016 to 2018. As you can see, with a minority ridership in both bus and rail, the percentage of that population remains the same in 2016 and in 2019. You will also notice with a low income ridership, there was a 6% decrease in bus ridership from 52% in 2016 to 46% in 2019. Next slide, please. With the limited English proficiency, this is updated to help identify the portion of the population that are Metro users that speak another language and have identified as limited English proficient. As you can see, 12% of Metro riders have identified as limited English proficient, and of that population, majority of the language spoken is Spanish. The percentage of Spanish spoken within the LEP population is currently 52.3%. That was an increase of 2.3% from the last time an analysis was done. This also helps Metro identify what vital documents need to be translated or what languages they need to be concerned about when they're doing outreach. Next slide, please. So this slide shows a breakdown by jurisdiction of the limited English proficient population of Metro customer. And as you can see, the majority of the limited English proficient customers ride the bus, and that both Montgomery County and Fairfax County have the highest percentage of LEP population. Next slide, please. With our Title VI complaint process and procedures, the Office of Equal Employment Opportunity has worked with the Customer Service Office to tighten up and enhance its complaint procedures. They have, anytime a customer files a complaint and is entered into the customer service database, those that have Title VI issues are flagged and sent to my office, where our staff reviews them and makes a determination whether they need to be investigated. And our staff will either conduct the investigation, or we provide oversight to superintendents who will conduct the investigation. The Title VI complaint procedures and the complaint form are on our website for customers to have. And in the past 3 years, there was no Title VI lawsuit filed, and we only had 5 formal Title VI complaints. This last slide shows other requirements that the circular indicates must be in the Title VI program in order to garner FTA's approval. One of the things it looks at is the non-elected boards. Metro has 2, and they are concerned about the minority representation on those boards. As you can see, the Riders Advisory Council has a 55% representation, minority representation, and the Accessibility Advisory Committee has a 56% minority representation. Also, this slide indicates that we conducted within the past 3 years monitoring Metro services to see if in fact it met the standards, and if there was an equitable distribution of the services. And the results of the service monitoring showed that there was no significant difference in the services between the services provided to minority and low income riders on both bus and rail to the services provided to Metro's non-minority and non-low income riders. At this point in the presentation, I'm going to hand it off to Ms. Davis, who will speak to you about some of the standards and what Metro is doing in the future under transit equity. Allison, you might be muted.
Ms. Bryan, if we're having difficulty, should we continue until, oh, there's Allison.
Hello,
Yeah.
thank you. Sorry about that. Get the technical hiccup out of the way early. So my name is Allison Davis. I'm Director of Strategic Planning in the Office of Planning. And before I talk a little bit more about the Title VI monitoring that's part of the program that Ms. Bryan was just mentioning, just want to talk through a couple of other elements that are actually on your agendas today, or partially on those agendas, and because there's a lot of overlap, though they're not exactly the same thing. So first and foremost, we have bus or rail service guidelines. And so these are the main metrics and measures that we use to plan service and allocate resources. And so this really helps us understand how well the service that we're putting out is doing. And it also helps understand equity between those services across the jurisdictions. And these range anything from span of service to frequency to bus stop spacing to cost effectiveness and circuity. So there's a fairly large range of those metrics. The second piece is the Title VI equity impact analyses. And these are conducted for major service changes, fare changes, and access to fare media. These primarily are done to accompany budget processes, but we also do it when we make service changes, such as like the state of good operations that bus often does. And the Title VI equity analysis is really understanding whether the proposed changes result in either a disparate impact for minority riders or disparate burden for low-income riders. And then the last part is the Title VI monitoring, which I'm going to spend the rest of the time in this presentation talking about. But that's what's conducted every 3 years for specific standards for both bus and rail. Next slide, please. So as noted, that monitoring must happen every 3 years as part of the plan. And what FTA has mandated we monitor is on-time performance, passenger load, which is crowding, scheduled headways, and service availability. So those four, and we'll get into the definitions that apply to rail and bus next, but they're mode specific and they can vary by peak period and off-peak period. They can also, for bus, vary by the type of service that we provide. And so what it is comparing the service levels at those standards for the protected populations, minority and low income, to the mode impact. And I just also want to flag that if the board chooses to update standards, definitions, and targets during the next period, we can amend the current plan. We need to get FTA agreement on that, but there is a path forward. So next slide, please. So these really hit what the rail standard, the definitions are, and what the targets are. And so, as noted, it's passengers per car. So how crowded are each of the rail cars at the peak load points? Frequency of service, customer on-time performance, and then the population served by Metro Rail. Next slide, please. And again, these are the bus standards. So looking at load factor, and like I said, this is both for peak and off-peak. It also does apply to the different types of service that we had defined in guidelines that were set in 2000. So then we also have frequency, schedule adherence, and the population served by Metro Bus. All right, next slide, please. So this is something that Ms. Bryan had alluded to. And so as we're calculating the disparate impact and disproportionate burden, we're comparing it to the total riders affected by the change. And so through a lot of peer research, through public engagement, through work with statisticians, we developed these thresholds, and they vary based on the total riders affected by the service. So that said, if maybe 4,000 riders would be affected, the difference between the percentage of minority who experience the change to the percent of non-minority is 8%. If it's 40,000, it would be 6%. So it's a way to differentiate between the implications of the impacts. So, and as Ms. Bryan mentioned, the results of the monitoring show that no significant difference exists between the service provided to Metro buses and Metro Rail's minority and low-income passengers, and the service provided to non-minority and non-low-income passengers. Next slide, please. So one of the things, and I know that on the board, you've been talking a lot about transit equity. And so really trying to understand the differences between Title VI and overall transit equity. And back in July, when there was a lot of discussion around equity, one of the points that became clear was that, under Title VI, the major service and fare changes are evaluated using a do no harm standard to ensure that minorities and low-income riders do not suffer disproportionately to non-minority and non-low income. And so the approach is, it has a limited set of standards and measures that we went through. It also is very much focused on our customers. And so transit equity is looking, how do we have an affirmative stance of delivering more and better service to those communities? How do we think beyond just our customers to what the residents in the region need to actually become our riders? How do we think about things like travel time, access to jobs, things that are beyond kind of those limited measures that are in Title VI? So that, if next slide, please. That actually presents some pretty significant opportunities for us. And I recognize in this current environment, that is saying something. So one of the main things is really advancing the bus transformation project recommendations. And so as noted, that completed, and the board did endorse many of those recommendations back in January. And the first of the recommendations is updating the Metrobus service guidelines, which is next on the agenda. And that will reflect both the customer experience and help us better measure equity across the service we provide. It's also continuing to partner with our jurisdictional funders who control the roads to improve both bus frequency and the reliability through bus priority and transit signal priority bus lanes, that sort of thing, because those are the things that we heard from the public as part of the bus transformation project that they wanted to see more of. Building off the public participation plan, which, can you go back one slide? Yes, thanks. Building off the public participation plan, and that's also on the agenda later, but really, how do we proactively engage communities, equity communities, prior to the planning? So as opposed to going out with the plan and saying, A or B, how do we have those conversations and understand what they need so that we can start to slot those in? Another element is looking at both bus and rail together as a system and understanding the impacts together as opposed to mode specific. And then finally, many of our peer agencies have both established a transit equity working group at the staff level, and we have one as well. But it's really thinking about they have moved forward to establishing those racial and social equity principles that really help outline how a lot of the work that we're doing, we bring that in through processes and policies. And so again, if that's something that the board is interested in talking, we can go through that later. Turn it back to Ms. Bryant to finish off.
I'm sorry, I forget to unmute. Thank you, Ms. Davis, for that information for the board. And we are requesting today board's approval of the 2020 updated version of its Title VI program and of the service monitoring results. And that concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Bryan and Ms. Davis. We'll turn it over now to discussion by the committee. We'll start with Ms. Gideby.
Good morning. Thank you again to the staff and your leadership of really being able to hone this presentation. I'm hoping that we can go to slide 4. As we talk about the definition of what Title VI means, I think the biggest piece for me is just the understanding of the excluded from and denied benefits of, essentially for taking any federal money from the government, FTA, USDOT, as part of Title VI. We are essentially also committing to ensure that we are not denying anyone benefits based off of race or national origin as part of those pieces. And we're ensuring that they're not excluded from being able to participate in any way because of race or national origin as part of that, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and then can we go to slide number 6, where we go to demographics? I think the piece here is that what we are, slide 7, I'm sorry then. For that slide where we talk about the demographics, what essentially the data shows us is that those who take Metro bus are most impacted by what Title VI would mean in terms of both race from a disparate impact and then burden piece, correct? Because the majority of the folks who ride our system take Metro bus, who would fall into those categories?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, cool. And then can you go to the final slide where you talk about transit equity? Oh, sorry, one more. And can you go to the slide before slide 17? I just want to commend the staff in terms of this slide, moreover, that even though Title VI is the base, the foundation, the minimum that you can do to ensure that you're not denying, you're not excluding, it's encouraging to see that the conversations that have been happening at Metro are really looking at transit equity, moving beyond the baseline of not trying to exclude, not trying to deny, but really looking at how the system works for all in terms of kind of pushing beyond the foundation of what's being listed here. So if you can go to the slide 18, I just want to express my appreciation because I think as someone who takes both Metro Bus and Metro Rail, I see a difference between the two realities, and seeing this opportunity to address equity by really looking at the system holistically, I think is a powerful one. I recognize that FTA is only asking you to do the analysis based off of Metro Rail separately and Metro Bus separately. But the reality is when folks ride the system, we're experiencing it as one. And so I'm encouraged to see that we are going to be thinking about how we examine the system overall, and that it's something that we've been doing even before this discussion by the board in advancing transit equity. I also am encouraged by the conversations around being able to really think about how we engage greater racial and social equity principles in our policies overall. So I just want to commend the staff for kind of pushing beyond the limits on this piece. Again, I think the other piece here is that while this happens every 3 years in coming before the board for approval because of FTA's triannual, I hope that we will be consistently making sure that we are building proactively plans to ensure that everyone is able to benefit from the system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Goodaby. Mr. Goldman?
Thank you. I want to commend the staff on a very comprehensive effort. Takes a lot of time and effort to produce this Title VI plan. And I'm sure it's especially more difficult in the current COVID environment. I find it somewhat ironic that our business today is this Title VI plan, which is Title VI of the landmark 1964 Civil Rights Act. And therefore, I just want to note the passing of a great civil rights advocate over the weekend, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who as a litigator, as a teacher, as a jurist, and as a Supreme Court justice, did much to advance the cause of civil rights and equity. Let me then just ask a question or two. And I want to turn to slide 7, I guess it's the one entitled Customer Demographics. It's not that one. It's slide 7. There we go. Our Title VI efforts are designed to protect two protected classes here: the minority ridership and the low-income riders as well on the system. And I just want to get a little better understanding of what we mean by minority and low income. Could you perhaps tell us what is the definition of minority and low income? What do we really mean by these terms, and where do those definitions come from? Are they part of the FTA circular, or are they definitions that WMATA develops on its own based on the ridership and population of the broader metropolitan area?
So for minority representation, Title VI specifically talks about race, color, and national origin. When you're looking at minorities or talking about minorities, usually most of the indicators come from the EEOC and its guidelines and how they define race and ethnicity. So we would be talking about the minority ridership would be African American, Asian, the Hispanics. There's an Alaskan Native American group. And
yeah, so if you go to your next,
I don't remember the rest. I apologize.
If you go to the next slide where you do the language breakdowns, Would it be fair that minority includes everybody on this list other than the Russians? The Russians aren't very popular these days with anybody, I guess. But I guess they clearly don't qualify. But are those the other groups that you have in mind?
So under the total LEP languages that are spoken, they would also be considered a part of a protected group because of either their race, ethnicity, or national origin, yes.
Yeah, so for our area, the minority group embraces all of these sort of ethnic or national or color or racial subgroups other than probably the Russians. We agree. All right.
Yes.
And then so turning to low income, what is our definition there and where does it come from?
So I can't speak directly to that. I know there are several definitions that are used. There is the federal government's definition of low income. I am not clear. I would have to get back to you as to what definition WMATA uses, unless Allison, do you
Yeah,
know?
I can, so in our surveys, right, the 2016.
Yeah, let's go back to let's go back to the other
Mhm.
slide 7.
Yes, so it is $30,000 because the federal income thresholds that Ms. Bryan referred to are by household size, right? So a family of 3 is X and a family of 4 is Y. So in our surveys, we have 30,000 is our cutoff. And it has been 30,000 for, I think, since 2008. I would have to get back to you on that.
All right, so I guess you're coming to my question. Is this a federal standard that we follow because it's in the FTA circular, or do we independently, are we capable of independently making a decision what we will define as a low income rider or low income family?
I will have to get back to you on that. I think we have latitude given the differences in household size and a challenge in being able to get that information the way.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking you that is because 30,000 really is very low. It's sort of poverty. You know, in an area like ours, which is fairly high income metropolitan area, I would think that people making $35,000, $40,000 or things in that range might be considered low income under a broader standard of what the term comes to mean. So I guess while we've put to bed this document for this year, maybe as we look to the next year or we do any other Title VI analysis, we should be taking a good hard look at how we define low income for purposes of our Title VI analysis and our next Title VI report.
Mr. Goldman, Lynn Bowersox. So we do use the federal standards of poverty, which is the 30,000 threshold that Allison explained. However, because our passenger survey information is quite a rich data collection, we do have income levels broken down throughout an incredible range. And so if the board were interested in knowing more about how that spreads across modes and across the region, we could provide that information in a separate briefing.
Yeah, my interest isn't responding as a board member if we want that information. We certainly do. What I'm trying to do, what I'm raising the question is whether as an agency, we want to take a look at what is our definition of low income and perhaps amend it so that we get data that more accurately reflects what is, you know, what's the nature of our ridership and what's the nature of those that are actually low income in this metropolitan area. So I'm really putting out there a question for my colleagues on the board to consider as we move forward. I just have one other question in this area. In the materials, other than the slides that you provided to the board, there's the statement that for some service standards, minority and low-income riders experience service that is better than the system-wide average. And I don't know who's the expert that put that language into the MEAD for the board's benefit, but I'd like to understand what that means. What exactly are the areas where the service is better for low-income riders and minority riders than system-wide average, and what better means in that context? Anybody, staff, want to take on an answer to that?
So I can talk to you generally about it. I would have to get back to you on like a specific location where that is true.
Well, I don't want generally. This is a sentence that appears in the mead that you provided to the board members. I want to understand what specifically that sentence means.
Right. So can you go to slide 14 for the bus? I think it's the bus standards. Might be slide 15. One more. That, thank you. Right, so because we're looking at specific standards, right? So if you took the vehicle headway, the frequency, right? So if we look at our radial routes or our suburban routes, we may have routes that are actually exceeding this frequency, that have high low income or high minority customer populations, and they're actually seeing better service because we're doing higher frequency on those routes than other services that are lower minority, low income.
So the service standard there is his headway.
Yes.
Is what you're measuring it against.
Yes.
In comparing system-wide versus what's available
Yes.
to minority and low income. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. I don't think Mr. Horner's joined quite yet. Mr. Alcorn?
No comments or questions from me at this point.
Thank you. Mr. Meridian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to echo my colleagues in showing appreciation both for the general manager and for his leadership in this and making it a priority, and also for the staff that's been doing the hard work that's reflected clearly in the presentation that we've seen today. So thank you for keeping this a priority, and it's one that I know the board will continue to ensure remains a priority.
Thank you, Mr. Meridian. Secretary Slater?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just offer kind of a thank you to the team for all the hard work on this report. I know there's a lot that goes into this, and then I'll offer a comment. You know, I've worked on these issues a variety of times over my career in these types of plans and in early planning, and Title VI and all aspects of Title VI are important, not only as a requirement for what we do every few years, but the aspects of Title VI are important in every aspect of our planning, our implementation, our maintenance, and the operation of our service. I just make the point that our network should work to improve access to opportunities for low-income communities at its core, and our equity practices to do that must go beyond the compliance aspect and just into really at the early phases. So just want to thank you for the work and stress the importance of this work in all that we do.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And Mr. McMillan?
Just a quick, I hope, technical question. To what extent do the availability of services provided by other than Metro factor into the analysis of the adequacy of the service we're providing? So, you know, people in particular in the Virginia and Maryland suburbs are sometimes served by both Metro and other regional bus providers. And then there's Mark, there's Very, things like that. How does that factor into the analysis of what Metro is doing?
So for the monitoring, it does not. We are not able to use other services in that way, but we do, as part of the Title VI equity impact analysis, when we go through, say, at budget time, when we have a large slate of changes or proposed changes, we will look at alternatives, because if we need to provide a mitigation, those are then we're able to kind of indicate those as long as they have, similar span, similar frequencies, similar, the routing is serving the same destinations. We can, point to that as an alternative that customers can use. So it's in terms of this Title VI program, it's not part of it. In terms of when we think about service changes during budget or state of good operations, that we can bring it in as an alternative.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. Okay, any final comments or questions for Ms. Bryan or Ms. Davis? All right, if there are none, I'd like to move approval of the item. Is there a second?
Second. I was muted, sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No problem. Seconded by Mr. Goldman. Now I'll ask Ms. Ellison to call the roll for the vote. Ms. Ellison.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Giddy,
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. Now that motion is, or that item has been approved, we'll move on to our two informational items. First, bus service guidelines. Mr. Webster, Ms. Davis.
Thank you and good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I'm Tom Webster, Metro's Executive Vice President of Strategy, Planning, and Program Management. I'm joined this morning by my colleagues, Allison Davis, who you just heard from on the previous item, as well as Peter Caffiero, who's Metro's Managing Director of Intermodal Planning. And Allison and Peter are here to support the committee's discussion of this item. This morning, we are presenting, excuse me. This morning, we are presenting an information item to discuss transit equity and Metrobus, and to present a draft of updated Metrobus service guidelines. Board adoption of new Metrobus service guidelines is the first recommendation of the bus transformation project, and one of 10 recommendations that the board identified in early 2020 for near-term action. I'm sorry, Dan, could you move back to the beginning of the presentation? Thank you. Service guidelines are the baseline of bus planning and monitoring, and are a framework for how decisions are made in more normal times when funding is available, and in times like the present where tough decisions will be necessary due to COVID-19 and the financial challenges. They create a straightforward way to compare similar service such that staff, board members, and the public are better able to evaluate equity and quality of service in different areas in the region. And updating Metrobus guidelines will bring Metrobus in line with our peers, including local bus providers in the region, as they've all updated and adopted guidelines since 2014. The board last updated Metrobus guidelines about 20 years ago. So importantly, there's a strong link between transforming the Metrobus system and opportunities to address the inequities that exist in the region. As noted on this slide, there are large demographic differences between Metro's customers on bus compared to rail, and in comparison to the region as a whole. Metrobus customers are approximately 81% minority, 46% are low income, and 58% live in households that don't own a car. When we collectively consider transportation equity, the ability of all residents, and particularly low income and minority residents, to access high quality transportation and increase their economic opportunity, it's important to consider that our region's residents experience public transit and transportation differently. And of course, transportation plays a key role in supporting upward economic mobility, and improving Metrobus service and the region's bus system overall will have clear benefits for both minority and low income residents of the region. The bus transformation project was an 18-month study to set the strategic direction for bus in the region. The outcome of the project was 26 recommendations covered under 4 main topics: frequent and convenient bus service, bus priority on roadways, creating an excellent customer experience, and improvements to governance of bus across the region. The board's endorsement of the bus transformation project earlier this year, you noted 10 recommendations for early action, one of which was updating Metrobus service guidelines. So service guidelines are the building block of transit service planning and the allocation of service. They define the types of service and identify the measures and targets that service is evaluated against. Updating service guidelines, again, was a recommendation, and it was also a request from our jurisdictional partners, all of whom have updated their bus service guidelines over the last 5 years. It was also noted during the FY21 budget process by elected officials, stakeholders, and those who participated in the public hearing process. We needed a clearer framework for how we make bus service recommendations and decisions. Our current guidelines were adopted by the board in 2000 and are clearly not in line with current industry best practice. From a customer perspective, the guidelines that exist today do not reflect their actual experience, nor do they allow customers or advocates to compare similar service across the region to really know and see if what we provide is equitable. Service guidelines provide staff and the board with information and an approach for clear decision-making when deciding whether to add, adjust, or remove service. Also, importantly, guidelines are of course aspirational. That is that they provide targets to transform bus service, but the adoption of guidelines themselves isn't a budget action or a financial action for bus service. So subsequent analysis as part of budget or of service changes will determine actual bus service changes on the street. In terms of service classifications, Metrobus service classifications adopted by the board 20 years ago no longer match reality in the region. They imply directional radial crosstown in sort of reference to the DC core, but don't actually describe the type of service that is provided. Next slide, please. They don't take into account the varying land uses across the region, and they result in comparisons between dissimilar services. Back one slide, I'm sorry. So the first step in the service guidelines process is developing new types of service and tiers to account for the varying densities across the region. All routes will be assigned to a service classification and a service tier. So our proposed service classifications include bus rapid transit, which are high frequency routes that have dedicated right-of-way or other transit and traffic priority measures. Framework routes, which are really the backbone of bus service with moderate to high frequency and straight routes with limited circuity. Coverage routes, which are low frequency service in lower density areas, especially areas with poor street networks, and commuter routes, which are really peak period service that connect residential areas, park and ride lots to areas of high employment density. These classifications will allow Metro to measure similar routes by similar metrics. They reflect more modern language and the reality on the ground. They identify service types that are more intuitive to the public and decision makers, and will align with local bus providers' classifications of their own services. Adding tiers based on density help distinguish the areas served. And during the bus transformation project, several of our partners, including our jurisdictional partners, indicated that the guidelines really couldn't be a one-size-fits-all approach. So Metrobus service guidelines and the proposed Metrobus service guidelines and the measures are listed on this slide. Each of these guidelines has performance targets that have been developed for each of the service classifications and tiers. It's important to note that these, again, are aspirational targets and should be used with some flexibility as we move forward. The proposed guidelines are expanded to include availability of service, span of service, headways and stop frequency, reliability, on-time performance and customer trip time, comfort, and route design characteristics. As part of the work to develop the guidelines, our team conducted a best practice review of national peers and a thorough review of all of our local providers in this region. The previous slide shows both the types of metrics our local bus partners use, as well as what SEPTA in Philadelphia recently implemented and MTA in Baltimore adopted in 2017. And as you can see, our regional partners and peers have much more robust service to evaluate, a much more robust approach to evaluating and planning service. Two examples of two of the guidelines, span of service and hours of operation, and at headway frequency are shown on this slide. Different guidelines are proposed by service type, so the BRT framework and the other types of service, and then by the density tiers. In an environment with limited resources, it's necessary to ensure that those resources are being effectively allocated to create the bus network the region really needs. However, we know that not all routes serve the same purpose, which is why they can't be evaluated just on ridership or cost efficiency alone, as is the focus of our current service guidelines, and they can't be used to evaluate on one route against another. So, just for example, over the past few months, it's become even clearer that bus service provides critical transportation to many of our region's most vulnerable residents. And there are a number of routes that serve transit-dependent populations or provide unique access for certain areas or certain destinations like healthcare facilities. And of course, other routes serve high numbers of riders, and still others are feeders from neighborhoods that feed rail stations or transit centers, providing transfer opportunities. The calculation of a route value for each route based on the above three characteristics, and those characteristics can be weighted. So in summary, the service guidelines expand our measures and targets, develop a clearer and formalized approach to service planning and the allocation of resources. And next slide, please. There is a great deal of uncertainty and of course many unknowns before us. With these new guidelines and approach, we'll have formal tools to help make what will be some difficult decisions heading into the next budget year. With the data, we are able to better understand and explain the trade-offs on where to adjust and reduce service. And it will also provide a clear way to understand how equitably Metro is providing service across the region. So continuing through the month of October, staff will engage with jurisdictional staff and local bus providers virtually to gather additional input and feedback on the guidelines. Staff will then return to the board with final recommended guidelines for adoption in December. And staff will be using these updated guidelines to evaluate the routes and help to build the FY22 budget, proposed budget, and they will use this framework to inform recommendations and justifications as we move forward. That concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. One quick question before I turn it over to others. Do you plan to work with the jurisdictions on development of any of these recommendations?
Yeah, so the recommendations were really, again, sort of born out of the bus transformation project, and there was, of course, extensive partnership and collaboration with the jurisdictions throughout that project. We have briefed the JCC on these draft proposed guidelines, and the team will be actively engaging with both the local bus service providers and the jurisdictional staff from each of the jurisdictions to gather feedback and input, and we'll incorporate that into the final proposal that comes before you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Gideby?
I am so encouraged to see this. So can you tell me the last time you said it was in the early 2000s? So it's been 20 years since we've been able to actually have bus standard updates for the region?
Yeah, the last board adopted update was in the 2000 timeframe, yes.
Okay. I just want to commend your staff and the full team for being able to prioritize this as an issue. I think it's hard to be able to talk about the type of service that bus riders should expect without standards that haven't been updated in several decades. And so I'm encouraged to see this. I speak to just the leadership of the board as well for being able to say that this was a priority that we wanted to see, especially as I think about the fact that when we looked at the previous presentation on Title VI and who is most dependent on Metro Bus, to see that we are moving towards having standards and performance metrics, even if it is aspirational, I think helps to allow for our riders to know what they should expect in terms of the level of service performance as part of it. I also appreciate the way in which you all thought about being able to have different service classifications in a tiered system to ensure that we could understand the different needs that this region needs overall. So overall, I just want to say thank you to your team for being able to deliver on this. I will share publicly that I think one of my original concerns with the Title VI piece was not being able to have these bus standards as part of the discussion, because it's hard to talk about a group that is most targeted and impacted by Title VI having to be dependent on Metro Bus and not having standards that had been updated since 20 years ago. And while the board has taken action in different ways throughout those years, I think that this is a great pathway forward for the possibilities for our region. So again, thank you to the team for your leadership on this issue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gideby. Mr. Goldman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Efter, you pointed out that Metro really hasn't reviewed their standards for many years, and noted in comparison with SEPTA that we apparently have never had standards for bus availability, route design, and reliability. Can you just talk through why that is, why we're dealing with adopting and looking at those kind of standards now in 2020, and we haven't looked at them over the last 10 or 15 years?
I don't have a great answer to your question. I mean, it should have been done sooner than now. We're at the point now where we're ready to go, and I'm encouraged by that. But there isn't. It's just been some time since Metro took this on.
All right, the mea culpa is accepted. Let me, I guess, turn to the slide that's entitled Service Classifications. Now, I want to talk a little bit about your bus rapid transit description or definition. And I want to just tell you that I hope when you'll be coming back to the Safety and Operations Committee with those standards later in the year, because as you pointed out, those are some of the things that the board emphasized as high priorities, as recommendations coming out of the bus transformation study. Anyway, under your number 1, bus rapid transit, I find your description of this somewhat Jello-like. I guess in my mind, the concept of bus rapid transit is more represented by what's going on in Montgomery County now with their Flash system, which is a bus rapid transit line that will debut this fall with a dedicated right-of-way off bus payment. Sort of there's kind of stations where you can buy your ticket, so that boarding is not just limited in payment through the front of the bus, but you can board through multiple doors of the bus, which speeds up the ridership, and where there's limited stops. And your definition here seems to put less emphasis on the rapid transit and just more emphasis on the bus. And it seems to suggest that just a bus along a high frequency corridor with maybe moving over a bus only lane will be defined as bus rapid transit. And I would ask you to really take a good hard look at that and rethink that, because I think the region is entitled to one definition of what is bus rapid transit. You know, one shouldn't have to have one definition riding on a metro bus service and another definition if riding on the Flash BRT in Montgomery County or similar projects that are under development in Virginia. And so I would hope you'll take a good hard look at that, because I think the committee, when you bring this back to us, will be looking for that sort of very specific bus rapid transit definition that emphasizes rapidity as opposed to just being on a bus that seems to be going down a bus only lane, which doesn't suggest a good deal of or significant improvement in the rapidity of the service. So I think the region is entitled to one definition, and I hope you'll, as you propose to do, consult broadly and seriously with the jurisdictions in the area and the local regional bus service providers, bus operators, before you come back to us with a definition of bus rapid transit, as well as the other three definitions. So we have common definitions of service classifications throughout the region, and regional bus riders can expect the kind of level of service on a metro bus that they may get riding in Montgomery County on the Flash service along Route 29 this fall in Montgomery County. So I don't know if you want to comment on that. It's more an expression of what I hope you'll be bringing back to us, and encouragement of you to consult widely with the jurisdictions and the regional bus service providers in developing those kind of classification standards.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman, and I appreciate that, and I agree. The more detailed definition of bus rapid transit that we've included in the much larger draft report speaks to many of the things you just described and those service characteristics. We will, of course, take another look at that and consult with each of the jurisdictions to make sure we've got it right. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Next, Mr. Horner's not with us yet. Mr. Alcorn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question and then just a comment. I guess my question is, one of the things that would really help me before, you know, as we look at finally updating these service guidelines, and I definitely, this 20 years is a long time, but I'm glad we're getting around to it now. It would help me, particularly when we look at the line and route performance measures, to see how that actually would apply to existing, at least a selection of existing lines and routes as we go through this process of updating the performance measures. You know, sometimes things look fine and, you know, a list of new performance measures, but then how that actually, how that scores, I think would be helpful for this board as it updates. There may be some performance measures that are missing, and, you know, maybe going through that process would help identify that it may be that there are too many performance measures to make it particularly useful in its intended purpose, especially, and I support, clearly there are new things we need to measure now that we weren't measuring 20 years ago. But I would just ask if possible, if the staff could just pick a selection of routes and show how those would score under the proposed guidelines. And then as part of the outreach, and I know that's actually coming up with the next information item. Perhaps include that in the outreach process as well.
In terms of showing how it would apply to routes, yes, we'll absolutely do that, and that's our intention to bring that forward. I'll turn to my colleague Lynn on, maybe she can address that in the second part in her upcoming presentation.
Okay, that sounds good. And then could you go to slide 4? If you could go back to that, and I know we're not addressing this today, but I did just want to flag this. I know there's been some discussion about this. Let's see. It may not be slide 4, I'm sorry. I'm not sure what slide number it is, but just one of the 4 key strategies for this whole bus transformation project is the task force. There we go. That's it. Yeah. So the number 4. I know this is not coming before the board today for any sort of action, but I did just want to flag there is a lot of concern across the jurisdictions in terms of how that task force, basically what it would be, what kind of powers would be delegated to it. Empower could mean a lot of different things, and just wanted to flag that. That's definitely an area that I think we'll need to have more discussion before going forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
Tom, any comment on that?
No, just to say we have heard and understand many of those concerns, and we can have a follow-on conversation with the board about potential next steps there.
Thank you. Good.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Mr. Alcorn. Mr. Meridian.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions. Just want to echo the thanks, Tom, to you and your team for taking this initiative on, and appreciate the thorough report.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Secretary Slater.
No questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just thank you to the whole Metro team for doing this. It's a really important step in our work.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And finally, Mr. McMillan.
Nothing at this time, Mr. Chairman. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. Next, let's move on to the customer engagement presentation. Ms. Bowersock, Ms. Bolton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everybody. We are very pleased to have the opportunity to share our customer engagement and outreach programs with the board today. And first, we would like to just briefly review the channels that we are using for customer contact in the many ways that we do it. And then we're going to review our outreach process, which was previously identified as a companion piece to analysis under Title VI. And then finally, I hope to discuss with the board some opportunities, building on some of the suggestions that you've already been talking about this morning, to reach more people and be even more inclusive going forward as we seek to expand our equity outreach. And so I'm very pleased this morning to have the opportunity to introduce my colleague, the Senior Director of Customer Care, Barbara Moulton.
Thank you, Lynn, and good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and thanks for the opportunity to share the contact center.
Even more inclusive going forward as we seek to expand our equity outreach.
Can you hear me?
I can, Barbara. There was a little bit of a overlap there with something else. So go ahead. It sounds clear. Yeah.
Okay, great. Again, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and thank you for the opportunity to share the contact center's activity. Based on 2019's activity, we had over 600,000 people contact us for live assistance. Another 500,000 contacted us and were satisfied using the IVR, our automated system, and that was mainly for fare and next bus information. The contact center is made up of 4 discrete units that are under one management system to best serve the customers, and I won't name them. They're on the slide in front of you. And next slide, please. Okay, how do customers contact us? Well, it's no surprise over the last 6 to 10 years, the way customers contact us has really changed because of technology. Telephone contact is down. Using the digital channels is up, and that merger of just people's lifestyles, many customers are now using mobile devices to contact us. In fact, the vast majority of our Metro Rail and Metro Bus customers have smartphones. According to a 2018 survey, passenger survey that we did, 94% of our Metro Bus customers had smartphones. Another survey found that our Metro Rail customers, 95% of them that had the registered SmartTrip card also had smartphones. So that's what's happening in terms of just the change in the way people contact us. Next slide, please. Why they contact us? Well, 92% of folks that contact us, whether it's on the website or through our contact center, are calling us and contacting us for trip planning. And with regard to why they're the 8% that have concerns with us, it's primarily around the service. Again, no surprise there. That's our core function. The interesting part, and can we have the next slide, please? We look back at these emerging channels, the emerging technology. It is just amazing the way it's been just tremendous growth. In fact, during the pandemic, we were able to leverage some of the digital channels that we use for customers for internal use too. We've seen growth 167% actually in Instagram. So it continues to be where we see and connect with our customers there. Again, we just try to meet our customers where they're at. It's a multi-channel contact center. Thank you.
Okay, so Barbara, thanks for that. And I'm sure as the board members have questions about the customer contact center, you will provide those answers. Meantime, I would like to move to the public participation plan. And unlike the standards, this is a little bit more updated. It was approved by the board 6 years ago, updated 3 years ago. We created the plan on the basis of about a year's worth of outreach to our customers to learn how best to create two-way dialogue with members of the public, especially how to be inclusive in a region where we speak 26 languages. The then board wanted to make sure that we had a consistent and equitable approach to ensure decisions were informed by as many members of the public as possible. And so as you'll see on the next slide, we use this program very broadly, and not just for fare and service changes, but also for planning studies, pilot programs, and environmental scans. So virtually all major policy issues that we are undertaking. So we know that to engage the public, we have had hearings historically, and we know that those are now, public hearings are now of limited value. We have to make it easier, faster, and more convenient than ever for the public to provide us feedback. Materials and activities have to be accessible and available in the various languages that people prefer, as well as in formats that they prefer. As Barbara said, we are increasingly a very digitally driven region. And so on we go to social media, the website, our major gateway of information, all of which in a pandemic environment have made our outreach and data collection from customers continue to be possible. In this slide, you see a picture of what pandemic outreach looks like. And we have efforted this with self-service materials that people can pick up with the plexiglass and masks. But even then, people are in this current environment very reluctant to have to come in contact with materials. And so we're using social media, we're using digital ads, we're using the hyper local community channels such as Nextdoor is the social media channel I was thinking of. And jurisdictions, some of the jurisdictions have incredible email listservs. Arlington, for example, has partnered with us to disseminate information out to residents using their community listservs. All of our surveys are conducted in multiple languages, and the personnel who go out to bus stops and board buses and go into stations are multilingual, always at least bilingual, but we typically try to offer 5 to 7 languages during outreach activities. And we target people at home using direct mail, snail mail, as it's now called, by zip code, so that we can make sure that we get the most inclusive sampling of public feedback possible as we try to collect customer input. And then our accessibility requirements do include a language access plan, which was mentioned in the previous presentation, that considers which communities are going to be affected by a policy or service change. And then we zoom in to that community and learn what the preferred languages are and the preferred materials and access points for material distribution are, and we tailor our approach accordingly. We work very closely with our accessibility office to make online and printed materials as well as events accessible for all of our customers. And so here you will see the most recent public participation plan document, which is available online for our customers, for members of the public. The most recent changes have really been to streamline the plan. We in fact had our public participation manager went to, as a developmental opportunity, attended the Project Management Institute, became PMP certified, and as a result of what she learned in that process, was able to better align the structure and format of the plan to be consistent between the communications team and the project management teams. And that has improved our internal collaboration considerably. As you heard from both Jen Bryan and Allison Davis, our public plan has also benefited from the office of our internal equity working group, and this reflects our equity outreach goals. And so finally, as has been mentioned by several board members, we'd like to flag some areas about our outreach approach for policy review going forward as we tackle this equity framework and look for opportunities to have a more equitable service. We also seek those same opportunities in our outreach programs. And 4 of the areas where we hope for continued dialogue are community engagement. So today we have 200 plus community-based organizations that we reach out to, through whom we attempt to engage communities and the public. We'd like to establish more routine, consistent, two-way dialogue with those community-based organizations and believe that would help inform management and the board's decision-making. It requires resources, obviously. The accessibility issue, again, this is one where we'd like to make more sustainable and scalable our options for translation services. And that includes not only our own resources, but leveraging third-party tools to expand outreach. And so our research team, for example, partners with certain app providers where the app users are already a more diverse pool of folks than we have access to. And so we will ask to access their users in order to get more responses to our surveys. And just this week, my team advised me that Apple's latest update on our iPhones contains a very powerful translation tool. So we're looking to harness that and see how we can work with our communities to use that translation tool so that we can improve our communications with our riders. The disparate impact and disproportionate burden standards that we use, as so many have said already today, are standards that are really the minimum. And so the question becomes, what more can we do? What's the best we can do, not the least we can do going forward? And so reviewing those standards and considering board policies that exceed those standards are certainly something that we would encourage engaging the public in. And lastly, post-COVID adaptation. So we've been learning a lot this year about community outreach in a pandemic. We need to look at some of the tactics that we've employed and decide whether they are temporary or permanent additions to our program. Obviously, the better responsiveness we get from the communities that we serve, we'd like to hang on to those ideas. And so virtual meetings, for example, may in fact prove not to be a lesser alternative to public hearings, but rather something that creates greater reach into communities. And if that's the case, then we would like to continue to employ those kind of tactics rather than some of the in-person things we do. So we're going to be looking at and evaluating the tactics that we're using this year to try to determine our go-forward plan. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would ask for any questions that the board members have.
All right, thank you. Lynn, just one quick question on the new mobile app that's out there. Do we have any numbers in terms of adoption? I know it's an unusual time, obviously, but just any indication on how people are receiving that product?
So because the phone providers and the Apple Store ownership is private sector and proprietary, we don't have current app download numbers, but what I can tell you is that the calls that have come in for assistance and questions about the app have been were very high. The numbers were very high in the beginning. They've become less so as people have learned how to use the app. It's been very, very well received, and the comments that we've gotten about it have been overwhelmingly positive. So I know that the usage is in the thousands, but I can't be more precise at this time.
Yeah, I was just curious. All right, thank you. Ms. Gideby?
Thank you, Lynn and Barbara, for this presentation. I just had a question in terms of how are we going to improve kind of the non-digital outreach? It's encouraging to see how many folks are engaged digitally, but we still have a good number of folks who are not necessarily in that space. And a lot of the presentation talked a little bit more on the digital side. So are there some proactive, I know especially you gave the in-person piece, but I think with COVID that offers a different reality. So how else are you thinking about some of those pieces for those who need?
So Ms. Gideby, that's a good point. So whereas we used to board buses with tablets in order to get people's information, you know, we can't share tools with folks anymore in a pandemic environment. And so we are working through different options. So snail mail is definitely one, going old school with some of the older techniques. Community engagement. You know, there are times when the only thing you can do is get to where people are. And so what's consistent in a pandemic is that people are still going to the grocery store. And so being in grocery stores with posters to get people to come online and take surveys. Of course, our surveys are mobile friendly. So that 94% number that you heard from Barbara about the number of people who have smartphones, they can take those surveys right on their smartphones. They don't have to have a laptop. They don't have to have, you know, an elaborate setup at all to participate in that way. So even the digital channels that we have are very customer friendly, but I am worried about the 5%. One of the things that we've talked about with the new Martin Luther King Library that's opened, which is a beautiful space. And we've been talking with them about having some things on site, both tutorials, learning how to use the apps and the surveys, as well as, you know, the old school paper exchange opportunities for information. And so continuing to partner with community locations and venues like that where people are still going. And the jurisdictions are also very good. City council people put our materials out, and that helps reach communities. Also the service providers, WIC and so on, you know, as people come in for other public services, they get access to our information. And I think that's an important channel as well.
And then is there a coordination team internally to Metro in which you are able to address the LEP? Do you have a team? I know you have a team, including Barbara, but outside of that, do you actually bring together folks to coordinate on the ADA LEP components that serve as, especially as it relates to the public participation?
So we do have full-time staff on LEP and ADA issues. The issue of translation is one where, quite candidly, we are probably not resourced in the way that we should be. We have been historically very reliant on contractors to provide these level of translation services that we have, and on staff who happen to be bilingual to supplement. Throughout the agency, actually, you know, some of the Asian languages, that if they happen to be spoken by a metropolitan transit police officer, you know, we'll have one of our police officers help us with translations at an outreach event. So the answer is that we don't have the systemic internal operation on the translation services for all materials that ultimately we'd like to get to.
When we're getting ready to do major budget changes or any major service pieces, is your team plus kind of the components on LEP, ADA brought together to be part of kind of the thought leadership of just how we're also engaging and disseminating those informations? Yes.
Yes,
okay.
Very much so. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. And then I just want to thank you again for the questions that you've placed forward for the board to consider. I'll definitely be thinking about some of those pieces. I think on the accessibility, it would be great for us to maybe see if we can coordinate with our council just to ask a little bit more in terms of what they may need so that we can make a more informed decision as a board. Thank you overall.
Thank you, Ms. Gideby. Mr. Goldman.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Barbara. Fascinating presentation, chock full of good information and statistics. And I'd like to just ask you a couple questions on some of them. On, if you turn to slide 38, the customer contact information. The first question, the 6-year trends, which have gone down, you say 41%. Do emails, are they included in the total contacts, or emails considered a separate category, and contacts means telephone contacts or a person-to-person contact?
Let me unmute. No, total contacts have gone down. Yes.
But do total contacts include emails?
Yes.
All right. So that the universe of emails is a subgroup within total contacts.
Yes.
And so what, in your expert opinion or your experience, accounts for this decline in contacts?
I think that customers, the self-service aspect, they can go to the website, they could use Google, they can use our IVR system. So we push alerts out. They're staying engaged with us by following us on Twitter. So they're getting the information they need without having to contact us.
And if I may, I would just add, Barbara initiated live chat a couple of years ago. And so she offers real-time information via chat. And I think that may have reduced the need for emails after the fact as well.
Right. So are the live chats, are they included as contacts, or that's a separate category?
Yes, yes. When I say
yes.
Contacts, I just mean they've contacted us. Now, I'll to be clear, emails does stay steady. I mean, it stays steady over the last over the last 10 years, they've grown, but they're at a place now, the last 3 years, emails are staying steady. And that's primarily because the emails are representing concerns, right? But when you're contacting us for information, you're contacting us through phone primarily chat and Twitter. You're using the digital channels for general information. Even Lynn mentions chat. We have chats for trip planning. They want to know how to get to point A to point B, and they'll stay with you and just chat away on how to get where they want to go.
Okay, but those Twitter chats and live chats, they're included and defined in the broader term contacts?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Just a question on the third bullet. Metrobus customers and seniors rely heavily on telephone. I'm fairly familiar with Metrobus customers, and I'm fairly familiar with seniors. My question is on the second one, young customers and Metro Rail riders. What is the definition here of a young customer?
Tech savvy. I mean, if you're asking me, do I know their exact age? I don't. We're making a generality about the fact that they're fast, number one. And I think if you look at industry standards, they'll tell you that it's the younger people are quicker to adopt technology. So that's where we're making that statement. And also, as I relate it to the content that they're asking about, right? When the older customers are calling, they're asking many times about services with Metro Access, senior passes, and that kind of thing.
All right, but so the younger customers, you're talking about a demographic group more than just teenagers and young adults. This could be people in their 30s or early 40s. Okay.
And, it's all comparative now. It's all relative.
All right. And besides your impressions and what you gained from all your experience years, do we have any statistics or any numbers that go with these communications preferences? When you say Metrobus customers and seniors rely heavily on telephone, do we keep any records or do we know what we're...
Yes, I can provide you with quarterly reports, annual reports, and we could tease out any number of samples and to drill down to what they've asked about. We record all calls, and you can tell by the very nature of the call that you're speaking to someone who is a little older.
All right, so but when you say Metrobus customers tend to rely heavily on telephone, but Metro Rail reliers on Twitter and live chat, are you talking about a majority, 51% of those groups? Are you talking about 60 or 70%?
Yes, I can get you those numbers.
Can you I think that'd be helpful to get sense of that over the last pre-COVID year. I suspect you don't have very useful or very good data for the COVID experience since March.
I'll get that to you.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Mr. Alcorn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lynn and Barbara, thank you very much. This is excellent stuff. I'm very impressed with the effort here. This is very helpful for me to understand how we're reaching people that don't always show up at our public hearings and aren't always the loudest voices. I do want to ask, just to go back in the last information item with the updated service guidelines. I know before the board adopts ultimately those updated service guidelines that there'll be a public hearing, folks can provide their comments through any number of ways. I'm curious, given the importance of the intent of that of this effort in terms of guiding future bus service in the region, are you able or are you planning to employ some of these techniques, particularly with LEP and NEP residents, in order to get feedback? And I realize those guidelines are way up here, a little bit amorphous, and it may be a challenge to get feedback, but is there a plan for that?
Yes, sir. With the exception of an in-person public hearing, we'll be using all of the same tactics that we typically do. The pop-up events in stations may be somewhat reduced. I think what our current plan is to try to do to really blitz the larger stations where we have the intersection of lines and we have the greatest number of riders, as well as the bus transit centers that tend to be the most heavily populated, to try to get the word out and data collected there. But for the most part, all of those same tactics are used, and all of our information is automatically in 7 languages. And then through various tools, we have the ability to do the translations in any language.
That's very good to hear. And I guess one follow-up on that, Lynn, which is how are you adapting the information that we need to update the service guidelines to this outreach? I mean, how are you boiling it down to something that's understandable to regular people?
So that's the most important question. When we approach our customers about policy changes, their questions are, how does this affect me? Are you changing my bus? Are you changing where it stops? Are you changing how frequently it runs, right? So it really is a very customer specific, line by line approach that people take, and how much will I pay and that kind of thing, right? The bigger umbrella policy roll-ups of these things are not as much of interest. And so what we try to do, particularly in our surveys, is capture that very specific, how does this impact your daily travel feedback, and the trip making decisions that you make based on the bus or the train that you depend on.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you're doing that. I would think, particularly with the customer experience portions of the guidelines, you know, the relative value of, you know, we have span of service, there's crowding, you know, on-time performance. A lot of those proposed guidelines I would think could be put in a way to get meaningful feedback from riders. And I hope we will be able to get some good feedback along those lines. So
the other thing that we do offer, Mr. Alcorn, is that we do have sort of an open comment section in the data that we collect. And so if a rider wants to say, you know, this doesn't work for me because I work second shift and I need a bus that goes there until this time, they have an opportunity to just fill that in. And those verbatims, we call them, you know, the word by word comments that the customers provide back, can be summarized and provided to the board as part of the staff report, typically are as part of an appendix in any case, and we'll make sure that you get a summary of those.
Great. Thank you very much, Lynn.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Alcorn. Mr. Marudian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions or comments.
Thank you. Secretary Slater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question. You know, when I looked at the presentation, one of the things I started to think about is, are there groups that we continue to have trouble reaching? You know, so do you see that as part of your work, Lynn? Do you see that there are groups that we continue to have trouble reaching? And if so, you know, what kinds of efforts do we think about when we're trying to kind of think about new and different ways to reach that group?
Sure. So, Mr. Secretary, we do have a challenge within the Latinx community in our region. People who prefer Spanish as the first language, even when we offer Spanish materials and Spanish channels, we don't see the level of participation. We have to oversample 10 and 20 times to get the proportionate amount of participation that we need. And we think that that's a variety of reasons, in just because some people think that, you know, government agencies share information and there's a trust issue with respect to where's this information going and is it kept private and how much am I providing to Metro and how will it be used? So that's one community that has been historically difficult to reach. The other one, quite frankly, most recently, in terms of the overall population surveys, we do okay with low-income African-American residents. However, when we try to get to the next level of engagement, like a focus group, which in these days has to be virtual and you have to have a camera and audio and a laptop, to participate, we have a very difficult time getting the level of participation that we want from those folks. And so the in-person has historically been the most proven and effective ways of reaching those riders and those customers. And with the limitations of the pandemic, that's been a struggle.
Thank you so much, Lynn. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. McMillan.
No questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, since there's no further business to come before the committee, we now stand adjourned. We will take a brief break before beginning the Safety and Operations Committee. So please stand by.
Good morning and welcome back to WMATA's events today, September 24, 2020. I'm Michael Goldman, Chair of the Safety and Operations Committee, and we're about to begin today's session, a rather unusual session for the Safety and Operations Committee. Thank you again for joining us this morning. Let us take care of our administrative matters first. We have today's agenda before us. If there are no objections, I'd like to move to approve the agenda as presented. Are there any objections? Seeing none, hearing none, the agenda is approved. We also have minutes from our last meeting before us for approval. I trust that everyone on the committee has had an opportunity to review the minutes from our September 10 meeting. Unless there are any objections, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. Are there any objections? Seeing none, hearing none, I'll consider the minutes approved. Thank you. We have one item on today's agenda, a required training session for all board members, including alternate directors, on Metro's agency safety plan, including the board's role in the plan's implementation. The plan itself will come back to the board for its federally required approval next month. I'd like to stress for board members and our audience that our commitment to safety management at all levels of the organization is critical to agency success. And I'm happy to welcome all of my board colleagues today for this vital training session. I believe two of our board members are unable to join us today. And because of the importance we attach to this training session on the safety plan, we will be setting up a separate session for those who couldn't attend today, so that all board members, principal members, and alternates will receive this required training on the board's agency safety plan. I'll now recognize our Chief Safety Officer, Ms. Impastato, to begin today's presentation. Teresa? Teresa, you should be unmuted and you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to present to the board this training session, which provides an overview of safety management systems and to review the role of the board in approving Metro's agency safety plan and supporting the implementation of safety management systems at WMATA. Operating entities in any industry face common challenges with respect to safety. Among these challenges are identifying safety issues before an incident occurs, ensuring that safety is considered during and after all changes, establishing consistent safety reporting processes at all levels of the organization, and optimizing safety in the face of resource and budgetary constraints. These are not new challenges, nor are the challenges unique to the transit industry. These challenges have faced nearly every industry throughout history. Systems have evolved to answer 5 fundamental risk management questions. What can go wrong? How do you know? What are you doing about it? Is it working? And how do you know it's working? Over time, these safety risk management practices have evolved and matured into a safety management system, or an SMS. SMS provides the foundation of an effective and robust system to manage safety risk through proactive identification and mitigation of exposures and hazards. SMS is not just another flavor of the month. SMS represents how safety as a discipline has evolved over time in multiple industries. Let's take a brief look at the history of safety. Over time, different factors drove the evolution of safety. First, technical factors, then human factors, followed by organizational factors. With regard to technical factors, from 1942 to 1945, for every 1 World War II casualty, there were 8 industrial accidents that caused death or permanent disability. Due to the high number of industrial accidents, safety could no longer be ignored. Initially, flawed machinery was identified as the leading driver of injuries, as exemplified by this pilot trying to fix his propeller while in the air. As machinery and equipment improved, human error became the primary driver of incidents. The focus shifted to improving human performance and behaviors by developing more rules and procedures and emphasizing compliance. Usually, after someone made a mistake that resulted in an injury or property damage, another rule or procedure was created and added to a company's rules and procedures manual in response. While safety continued to improve due to a focus on reducing human failures in isolation, these efforts were still largely reactive. Over time, adding rules to operating manuals has diminishing returns, and these manuals may begin to collapse under their own weight in an effort to proceduralize every imaginable scenario. When a company decides to go after a new business opportunity, a lot of work is put into thinking ahead. This effort helps determine whether the opportunity is worth the company's investment in time and resources. After careful consideration, the new business opportunity is only pursued if there's a good chance that it would be profitable. Organizational factors is about taking the same principles used to effectively manage the business and applying them to the discipline of safety. This allows us to make the shift from reactive to proactive by requiring us to think ahead about the inherent safety risks that exist and actions that we are going to take to mitigate those risks before an incident occurs. It's important to note that safety risk management is a continuous process, and the implementation of an SMS is never truly complete. By establishing a management system around safety, the opportunity to become a learning organization that continuously improves which powers the progression from a historically reactive safety program to a robust, proactive one. Safety management systems are being adopted across the transportation industry and in other high reliability organizations throughout the world. Regulatory agencies in all modes of transportation are establishing SMS-based requirements, ensuring that SMS is here to stay. Under the FTA's oversight, WMATA historically managed safety through a system safety program plan. This plan addressed technical and human factors aspects of safety risk management. On July 19, 2018, the FTA published the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan, or PTASP, final rule, which requires certain operators of public transportation systems that receive federal funds to develop safety plans that include processes and procedures to implement safety management systems. The PTASP rule became effective on July 19, 2019, and expands the management of safety to include organizational factors. Transit agencies must develop an agency safety plan, which meets the requirements of the FTA rule by December 31st, 2020, and must update the plan on an annual basis. Per the regulation, the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan and subsequent updates must be signed by the accountable executive and approved by the agency's board of directors or an equivalent authority. The board of directors' approval indicates the ASP complies with each requirement of the PTASP regulation and will effectively guide the agency in the management of safety risks. As I stated earlier, WMATA traditionally managed safety through an SSPP. This slide shows the evolution towards managing organizational factors by clearly defining the responsibility for safe operations at the level of the accountable executive or CEO, and expands the role of safety analysis as a factor in decision-making throughout the system. SMS is a formal management. The definition clearly indicates it is a management approach that is recognized or official within the agency. SMS is owned by management, used by management, resourced by management, but implemented throughout the entire organization. In order to obtain the downward pressure on a safety performance plateau and to address the challenges and gaps in the current approach, transit systems must put the management of safety in its proper domain within executive management. This doesn't mean that safety professionals no longer have a critical role in safety management. It just means that final accountability rests with the highest level executive, with those that can allocate necessary resources to address safety concerns. It means that accountability for safety management moves outside of the safety office. Simply put, it's not one person's job anymore. To think about it another way, cost accounting is a great practice for tracking finances, but it's not a financial management system. It's a technical discipline, most likely owned by the chief financial officer, not the CEO. In much the same way, developing safety risk management analytical tools, acquiring and analyzing safety data, and monitoring safety performance are all key responsibilities of the safety department in an SMS. But the ownership of safety performance outcomes rests with the operational chain of command. SMS follows a principled approach. Under SMS, safety is a core organizational function in the same way that, for example, financial and human resource management are considered core organizational functions. Under SMS, safety becomes an everyday expectation woven into everyday activities. It provides management with data and decision-making tools. It's important to know that SMS is not new. It is scalable and effective across a broad range of organizations and applications. SMS is also now the safety policy of the U.S. Department of Transportation and is endorsed by the Transit Rail Advisory Committee on Safety and major public transportation industry associations. SMS has been implemented in the U.S. aviation industry for a number of years. It's also used in the maritime industry and in Canada and the UK for rail operations. SMS has 4 primary components. Each one is necessary to the success of SMS and relies on all of the others to work. Safety management policy serves as the rules of the game. Safety risk management can be considered as a process to identify things that could happen and develop strategies to reduce the risk of them happening. Safety assurance includes processes that comprise activities to ensure that the mitigation of consequences implemented during safety risk management work as expected. Safety promotion emphasizes communication and training to support the SMS. Safety management policy is the first major element or pillar of SMS. What distinguishes SMS from system safety and other safety programs is that it's a management system. It guarantees that management is involved. In general, safety management policy lays out all of the key elements required to carry out the SMS, including people's roles and responsibilities, as well as the safety processes and activities needed to implement an effective SMS. The safety management policy defines the organizational structure, SMS accountabilities, and the necessary policies and procedures that are required to support the SMS. The safety management policy also addresses SMS planning and how the processes are documented, along with how safety performance is established and measured. The safety risk management component has 2 major subcomponents: hazard identification and analysis, and safety risk evaluation and mitigations. These are safety risk management concepts that we're already generally familiar with, but SMS frames them in a new and proactive context. We consider in this evaluation the effectiveness of current risk mitigation strategies. Unique to SMS is the designation of duties. Safety staff assist with the identification and analysis, while operating and maintenance departments and divisions own mitigation, and it's incorporated into their daily management activities. Change management and mitigation of consequences of hazards, instead of the hazards themselves, are added to safety risk management by the SMS. Safety assurance is the 3rd component of SMS. This term can be taken as literally translated. This is the step that assures that safety management is effectively working throughout the organization. There are many activities that support the safety assurance process, including safety performance management and monitoring practices that support and quantify the performance of the transit agency to meet safety objectives. Earlier, we discussed the importance of executive management, accountability, and responsibility. When the agency has arrived at the point of having determined what its safety objectives are and implemented activities that support meeting those objectives and targets, it is then in a position to begin monitoring and measuring its progress. Safety assurance is that monitoring and measuring process. The working relationship between safety risk management and safety assurance is essential in supporting the SMS. The continuous collection and analysis of data validates or invalidates assumptions made when mitigations were implemented or new processes were designed. This is the SMS component that truly moves transit from a reactive to a proactive approach to safety. SMS performance measures should reflect SMS's role at the agency and its function in ensuring that safety risk mitigation measures are effective and the agency's safety performance objectives are being met. Safety promotion is the last of the 4 components. The promotion component is instrumental in attaining employee buy-in to the SMS. Employee commitment is best accomplished when individuals understand not only how the SMS benefits the organization, but how it benefits them directly. Employees must understand SMS in order to implement it. The safety promotion pillar focuses on communication and training on core safety management concepts. It sets the tone for the agency's safety culture. Safety promotion permeates all other components. It's the necessary grease or oil in the machine. It provides a platform to develop a safety culture that is positive and robust and fosters high levels of safety communication. Safety reporting programs are a cornerstone of an effective and proactive safety management system. Metro is planning for the realistic implementation of an effective SMS, understanding that the implementation will take time and resources and will require a phased implementation strategy. The WMATA board plays a critical role in the success of the SMS by approving the agency safety plan and supporting the accountable executive in the ongoing implementation of the plan. Staff respectfully request that the board review the agency safety plan and consider a resolution to approve the plan at the October 8th meeting. That concludes this training session and presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Impastato. Before opening up to questions in a round robin fashion, I just want to emphasize for my colleague on the committee and the board the importance of this undertaking on the part of the board. We are both approving this agency safety plan next month, and at the same time, we will be making sure that we provide the resources, financial budgetary resources that will carry out the plan's objectives and specific requirements. And so to be precise about this, we need to approve it next month. And in doing so, following the FTA regulations, we have to find that the plan is satisfactory, that it meets all the requirements that are set out in the FTA regulations, and that it will guide WMATA with the management of safety risks for both Metro Rail and Metro Bus. Now, we are obviously not safety experts. We are board members that come from various backgrounds and various jurisdictions. So to give us a level of comfort in taking on these board responsibilities next week, the committee leadership, Mr. Horner and I, have asked the general manager or CEO to provide a certification that this agency safety plan complies with these federal requirements, and will receive that certification prior to the committee considering the agency safety plan for approval when it next meets on October the 8th. So to just set that timeline in a clearer fashion, I just want to ask Ms. Impastato when the board members will be receiving the actual agency safety plan to begin their review prior to having to vote on it next month. And if you know when we will receive the certification from the general manager.
Sir, they were submitted as part of the MEAD.
Sorry, they will be submitted.
They have been submitted as part of the MEAD for this presentation.
For this presentation today.
Yes, sir.
But the actual agency safety plan, is that also part of the MEAD, or is that the document that we will be receiving over the next 2 weeks prior to October 8th?
It's part of the MEAD. It's attached to it.
So I encourage you all, you now have that document before you, and you can begin to look at it before we have to take it up at our October 8th meetings. Perhaps you could also just summarize what is the organization of the agency safety plan? How does it go about carrying out the safety responsibilities under the SMS?
Certainly. The agency safety plan is organized in much the same fashion as I presented with the 4 distinct elements or pillars. There's a section of the plan that outlines the safety management policy that includes the structure for decision-making, accountability, and responsibilities. There are sections of the plan that detail the processes that Metro has in place to execute safety risk management. There's a section of the plan that details the processes that Metro has in place to execute safety assurance activities. And there's a section of the plan that details the multiple avenues through which Metro promotes safety. Embedded in these 4 sections are targets and objectives, as well as specific tactical information with regard to business processes that Metro follows to execute, assess, and continuously improve the output of all of these functions.
Just to drill down a little bit, I mean, one area that's been a subject of concern has been the safety audit for the rock. And so does the plan drill down and specifically address rock-related safety issues? Does it entail a plan that meets some of the concerns of the Metro Rail Safety Commission in terms of the number of rock controllers, the training of the rock controllers, and the whether we will be in a position to satisfy the number of controllers to man a 4th console before Silver Line Phase 2 can be implemented and go into revenue service sometime next year? How does the plan deal with those kind of specific issues?
The plan details the role of the ROC in the Metro operation. It does set targets and objectives for the ROC's contribution with regard to the overall safe state of the operation. The plan details a number of aspects that have been noted requiring improvement, but it is not a line item by line item accounting of the corrective action plans that Metro is putting in place. The document is higher level. Those corrective action plans are part of the safety risk management and safety assurance implementation of the plan. So the plan provides the framework for the application of SMS to the ROC, but does not delve into the specific concerns that were included in the ROC audit.
Thank you. I hope that's helpful to my colleagues on the committee and the board generally as they review the plan over the next month. So now we can do our round robin round of questions. Mr. Horner, welcome.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Ms. Gedebe.
My only question is actually around the 4 guiding principles. I think it's the 12th slide. The major piece is top down and organizational wide in terms of the role of safety. I think one of the things that we always talk about from a cultural perspective is that safety is everyone's role and responsibility as part of it. But when you do a top down, it doesn't maybe always allow for the space for folks to be able to share when there are real flags, because it's not being able to have that space to also air up the concerns and challenges. So when the actual plan is allocated, while it's everyone's responsibility, and appreciate the general manager being able to be at the head to ensure that that is a space in which he will continue to offer direct leadership. What is the mechanism in place through this SMS plan and principle that ensures that folks have, I would say, maybe a safe space to be able to flag things? Because sometimes when it is top-down hierarchical, it doesn't offer the true opportunity for people to be honest about flags. And things like safety, more specifically for me, is one where unless you are literally on the ground seeing it firsthand, you may, even if you're at the highest level, can't see the day-to-day pieces. So how's the plan incorporating that piece of moving a little bit beyond top down and really making sure that there's space to elevate real challenges that may be coming up from a safety perspective?
The key to that is in the safety reporting programs. The requirement for top down is to support the implementation of the SMS and to establish accountability for creating the environment in which employees are encouraged, obligated, and empowered to identify and proactively address safety risk concerns. One of the key elements that we've outlined is in the invaluable nature of employee safety reporting programs. These safety reporting programs are one of, if not the most critical aspects of a successful SMS. I agree wholeheartedly that the most important source for information doesn't come from the C-suite. It comes from the frontline workforce. And if we don't create a culture that enables the frontline workforce to feel comfortable proactively identifying risk and suggesting opportunities to reduce that risk, then we will have failed in our implementation of the SMS.
And so, and I appreciate the movement to this slide. So is it that there's like a, okay, so I'm hearing you, which is it's through the reporting program that folks will know to be able to kind of elevate up the concerns or flags. Is it are we instituting a hotline that's anonymous? But sometimes when you have a strong hierarchical structure, the safe space to be able to raise real issues and concerns also offers its own realities and challenges. So how are we ensuring that there are no retribution for being able to raise real concerns that may be happening, but that there is a clear process that everybody understands that if there is an issue, you can raise it. Can you talk a little bit more about that piece?
Absolutely. So Metro currently has numerous safety reporting channels. We are expanding these safety reporting channels and improving them. There is a safety hotline. That hotline is manned by safety department personnel 24/7. And an employee can call that hotline with any concerns that they have relative to working conditions or work practices. They'll receive a live response, and the safety department will offer to treat their identity as confidential if the employee requests. For issues that may not be urgent, like issues that would be brought to the safety hotline, we do have a confidential close call reporting program. That enables employees who had outcomes other than that which were desired, near miss events, if you will, to report confidentially to a third-party broker. The close call reporting program will then trigger a peer review process within Metro. So employees' peers will take a look at the circumstances surrounding the near miss incident or close call incident, identify causal factors, and recommend systemic changes to eliminate the possibility of recurrence. That is a core effort that Metro proudly stood up. Metro is one of the few agencies currently implementing an SMS that has a mature confidential close call reporting program. We are currently reviewing that for improvement opportunities as part of our SMS deployment.
Okay, that's very encouraging to hear. And then the final piece is, as part of this SMS like final report, are we also putting in mechanisms to be able to along the way do the checks? It was really interesting to hear that we hadn't had a bus update in 20 years, but if that was part of a regular standard check, someone probably would have flagged it. And while I'm not necessarily comparing the two, I do think being able to have those standards in place as a process piece. So if we are missing something, if there's a gap, we're finding it. Can you talk a little bit more about how those pieces are being proactively added to this plan that will be submitted?
Absolutely. So the regulation requires, as a minimum, an annual review and certification of the plan. So we need to take a look at the plan on an annual basis, see that it accurately reflects the activities that we're undertaking, identify any opportunities for improvement. If we have gaps or non-compliances with the plan, we must address them with a corrective action plan, and we must certify to the FTA that we are in compliance with our plan. As part of the safety assurance activities, we will be implementing a number of processes to assure the efficacy and timeliness of our system review. This essentially overlays the existing processes that Metro is implementing with a quality management system to assure appropriately intervaled review of our risk management and safety processes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Appreciate your leadership.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Alcorn, who is pinch hitting today for Mr. Letourneau, who is the other member of the committee, the member from Virginia. The pinch hitting metaphor is apt, since as the chair indicated in opening the session, Mr. Letourneau was injured coaching his son's baseball team over the weekend. So, Mr. Alcorn, welcome to the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goldman, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up, I want to thank Ms. Gideby for those excellent questions. I think you're really driving at something that, to change the culture and the norms relating to safety. I think you're asking the right question. So thank you. And I don't have any other comments or questions.
Very good. Secretary Slater, are you back with us?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Mr. McMillan.
No questions for me. Thank you.
Mr. Meridian.
No questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks. Chair Smedberg.
Oh, sorry about that, Michael. You actually asked my question, so I have no other further questions. Thank you.
All right. So as this is a training session, we'll also turn to the alternates who have been participating with us. Mr. Bulger, alternate from the district. Are you with us and are you on mute? All right, we'll move on for the moment and come back. Mr. Aguirre, welcome, the alternate from Virginia. Welcome to the board meeting and welcome to the committee session this morning. And thank you for participating in the training today.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Absolutely. No, I'd just like to say that Ms. Gideby brought up some of my concerns. So no questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Graham, alternate from Maryland. Tom, are you with us this morning?
I'm here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't find my my unmute button. My question was answered. It was around a near-miss tracking process that we use quite frequently in the utility industry, but that was addressed. So thank you.
Very good. So I think that completes our training session for those who have participated this morning. There are, as we noted, 3 members who were not able to participate today and will be the subject of a, so we say a makeup training session. Mr. Rouse, Mr. Costa, and Mr. Bulger. And so I'll ask the Chief Safety Officer to schedule that with them and let the rest of us know in case we want to do a makeup or learn a little more. If not, though, we'll look forward to seeing you present again when the committee in regular session takes up the agency safety plan on October 8th next month. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that completes the meeting of the Agency Safety and Operations Committee for today.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. You ready, Dan? Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the WMATA board meeting of September 24th, 2020. I want to thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to ask the board corporate secretary, Ms. Ellison, to call the roll. Ms. Ellison.
Chair Smedberg,
Present.
Vice Chair Gidby,
Present.
Vice Chair Goldman,
Here.
Director Horner,
Present.
Alternate Director Alcorn,
Here.
Alternate Director Meridian,
Present.
Director Slater,
Present.
Director McMillan.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Now I'd like to move to approval of the agenda for this morning's meeting. Now that we have an agenda before us before approval, I'd like to move approval of the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Gidby. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda is approved. We have 10 sets of minutes for approval. You'll see the list there on your docket agenda. I'd like to move approval of these minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Meridian. Any comments or question on any sets of those minutes? Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Mr. Chair, I'll abstain. This is Alcorn. Not in attendance for any of those.
Thank you, Walter. All right. So the minutes, the ayes have it. The minutes are approved. Now we'll move on to public comment. Now for the public comment portion of our agenda, let's hear from our customers. Dan, you have some video for us?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. There are 16 public comments today. Here's the first. It's from Philip Malter. Metro can save the money needed by going to autopilot on trains. The simplest, easiest, and safest place to eliminate the operator is a Metro train. I visited friends in Seoul, Korea, whose Metro line was autopiloted. That Metro line had a 100% safety record. An autopilot on an automobile must be able to deal with an almost infinite variety of potential paths and obstacles in its path. A Metro train is the exact opposite. Metro operators average over $100,000 per year. The savings would be immense. All it takes is the leadership to do it. Public comment number 2. From Carl Schumann of Montgomery County. Please don't reduce service. I moved to Leisure World from Ohio to be close to frequent Metro service at Glenmont. Public comment number 3. From Joan Cleary of Montgomery County. Dear Metro Board of Directors, as a new resident of Montgomery County, I was looking forward to being a frequent user of the Glenmont station. Please do not severely cut the schedule at Glenmont station. Thank you, Joan. Public comment number 4 from Sherry Lopez of Montgomery County. Please do not stop all trains from coming to Glenmont. This is a very active station during normal times. Thank you. Public comment number 5 from Trent Watacha. Please do not stop the Metro train service to Glenmont. I live in Leisure World in Silver Spring, and the Glenmont Metro is vital to our community. Thank you. Public comment number 6 from Murray Relkin. Please retain the number of trains in service for the Glenmont station. We use this frequently, and if you eliminate some trains, friends and family may not wish to visit us. I also go to the museums via the train. If you eliminate some, I most likely will not go into Washington to tour. Public comment number 7 from Marilyn Foucan. I'm an elderly resident of Leisure World. We rely on Glenmont Metro to get us to and from DC. Please consider our needs when thinking about limiting Glenmont. Public comment number 8 from Maurice Zeman. We use the Glenmont station all the time. Please do not limit the trains' times for them coming there. Public comment number 9 from Susan Kramer of Montgomery County. Instead of immediately leaping to cut service from Glenmont, why don't you tell us how you plan to clean the Metro cars to ensure that we are safe from the virus? I read the Post every day and rarely see anything about what Metro is doing to clean and sterilize any equipment. There's nothing on the website either. Hello? Why on earth have we not heard that Metro plans to clean every single rail car and will continue to do so for the extent of the pandemic? If NYC could do it, Metro can do it too. Mr. Wiedefeld can make that commitment to Metro riders, but he has not. I and my colleagues who are federal workers will not come back to Metro until we are sure the cars and stations are cleaned often. Additionally, if you reduce the trains, there will be no opportunities for riders to social distance. That too will keep us away. Public comment number 10 from Tom Wegner. Reverting to turnbacks at Silver Spring and effectively cutting in half the service to Glenmont will cause me to forget Metro. I'm already giving up on the bus to Glenmont, and half the available trains will just keep me in my car the rest of the way. I hate the idea of giving up my use of public transportation, but COVID risk plus half service equals car. Public comment number 11 from Thomas Bickford of Montgomery County. We live in Leisure World, where there are 8,000 elderly and handicapped people, many of whom don't drive. In addition, there are many other communities for the elderly and low-income people who rely on public transportation to get to work. Decreased service would be a hardship on them. It is also important to continue bus service on the Y routes to get people from the subway to their destination. Public comment number 12 from Peggy Horng. Please do not reduce trips to Glenmont. I need it for my commute to places outside my condo. I do not drive. Public comment number 13 from Linda Rodner. I live in Leisure World and use the Glenmont Metro stop to get into downtown DC. Please, please don't cut service. Public comment number 14 from Grazina Blakaitis. Please keep the half trains to Glenmont. We at Leisure World depend on them. Please do not eliminate them. Thank you for listening, Grazina. Public comment number 15. From Lawrence Cohen, please do not underestimate how important the Glenmont station and the continuity of good service to places like Leisure World with over 8,000 seniors, many of whom are losing their vision or have lost their eyesight. As we age with various diabetic neuropathy, more and more people are losing visual acuity. It can be a steep learning curve to learn new modes of transportation and facilities. Please keep this in mind when you're making your decision on decreasing service to the station. And finally, public comment number 16 from Judith Oliver. Please do not limit the number of trains coming from the Glenmont station. Mr. Chairman, that concludes our public comment for today.
For today's meeting. This concludes the public comment segment of the meeting. Now we'll move on to reports from the Advisory Committee. First up is report from the Accessibility Advisory Committee. Unfortunately, the Riders Advisory Council Chair is under the weather and was unable to provide a video for today's meeting. However, the RAC written report is posted online. And now I'll turn the floor over to the ACC Chair, Mr. Posner. Mr. Posner? I believe we have a video from Mr. Posner. Should we come back to that, Dan? Is there an update for us, please? Okay, thanks, Dan. All right, we're having a little technical difficulty with Mr. Posner's video, so we'll come back to that. So now we'll move on to the report of the chair. Over the last several months, the Metro Board and staff have made strides toward advancing transit equity in the region. First, in June, the board established the Metro Transit Police Department Investigation Review Panel. I will speak a little bit more about that later in my report. In July, the board and general manager outlined a transit equity framework to advance policies and practices that support our mission. We had made commitments around policing, service, fares, contracting, training, and many more areas. To that end, the board has asked Metro Transit Police Chief Ron Pavlik to brief us today on his department's efforts on community policing and engagement efforts. Now I'll turn the floor over to Chief Pavlik. Chief Pavlik, welcome.
Yeah, good morning, Chair Smedberg and Metro Board members. This is Chief Ron Pavlik, and I'm here today to provide you an update on our community policing and engagements efforts. As you stated, we previously met on June 23rd, and I'm pleased to inform this board that we have identified the 3 panel members that make up the law enforcement component of our 7-member panel. We have commitments from the Metropolitan Police Department, the Prince George's County Police Department, and the City of Alexandria. I also have appointed the commander of our OPRI, Office of Professional Responsibility Inspections. He will serve as a lead or as a point of contact for this panel, providing them documents as needed and the like. I believe later on today, you will announce the 4 civilian members and the board will approve that. Between now and the end of the year, we will bring all 7 panel members together. We will present them with kind of a meet and greet and overview of the Metro Transit Police Department. We will review key policies that our officers are adhered to, whether they be use of force policies, employee misconduct. We also spend a little bit of time going over the collective bargaining agreement between the FOP and management. And then we'll spend a little time talking about crime analysis and how geographically the transit police are broken down and how we watch crime and monitor crime. And then we will spend a little bit of time in our use of force simulator, decision-making simulator. This will provide them an opportunity firsthand to deal with some of the challenges that law enforcement deals with. And then we anticipate bringing them back prior to the end of the year to go over some rail safety training and bus training so they realize some of the dynamics of bus and rail. And then we'll close out with the 4 civilians, spending some time on a ride along. We anticipate this will all be done prior to the end of the year. We will also go over some older cases and have an opportunity then to review how our discipline matrix is composed and how investigations are completed. We will bring them back in early January 2021 and begin the quarterly review process. Can we go to the next slide, Dan? Okay, so back in June, I did talk about the creation of our new bureau, the Internal Oversight and Youth Services Bureau. I'm pleased to report that this bureau is fully operational at this time, as well as the Youth Services Unit. The Youth Services Unit really has 2 core objectives that they're going to work on, is youth engagement and how can we engage with our young riders throughout the transit system, both on bus and rail. And then community engagement. How can we get more involved in the communities that we serve? As Lynn mentioned earlier in her presentation, it is a little challenging right now with COVID and some of the other challenges and reduced ridership to engage with our young riders and the citizens that use Metro Bus and Metro Rail. So we're trying to think creative and out of the box on how we can do that. We do have a couple of events coming up. National Night Out, which is traditionally the first Tuesday in August, was postponed due to COVID. It is now scheduled for October 6th. And you'll see transit police and law enforcement agencies throughout the National Capital Region looking for and engaging the community to remind them the role that law enforcement plays and the role we need the communities to play to support law enforcement. Also, in the month of October.
Chief, if I could I just stop you for a moment? We seem to have lost your presentation.
Okay.
Did you have slides for some of the things you're talking about with bullet points, or are they just?
No, I do, sir. It's should be slide number 2 or slide 3, actually.
Okay.
We go back one more, Dan, if possible.
Okay, there we
go. Yep, right there. Yep. So the other thing scheduled for October is called Faith in Blue. A very outgoing pastor reached out to the Department of Justice and has formed a national-wide campaign on how law enforcement can engage with the faith-based community. So we're looking to partner with our law enforcement entities across the NCR. That'll take place the weekend of Columbus Day. And this is an opportunity for law enforcement to engage with the various faith-based communities and continue to spread the outreach and what law enforcement can do. I'm going to transition to 2 videos. Hopefully Dan can get them to play. Basically, as I said earlier, we're trying to find new ways to engage the community under these times of COVID and reduce ridership. So part of the Youth Services Unit, part of their core objective is to engage the community. And these 2 short videos will just be a brief example of how we're doing it under these times of COVID. So the first video was shot at the Anacostia Metro Station, and the second video at Eastern Market. And that's really what the Youth Services Unit, if we go back one slide, the Youth Services Unit, one of their core objectives is just to do that. We're going to continue to do that. So far, year to date, this unit's completed nearly 24 of those outreach events. And part of the internal oversight and Youth Service Bureau job is oversight. So we have been working internally with QUICO and to ensure our policies are in line with the quality management system plan. And our third-party vendor, Lexipol, is on board, and we have begun numerous reviews of general orders and policies, and we look forward to posting them in the near future. Other thing I'm pleased to report about, earlier this year, back in February, March timeframe, we applied for a Department of Justice grants through the COPS program. And one of those grants was to provide technical assistance to us. We specifically asked for technical assistance for youth engagement and community engagement. I'm pleased to report in August of this year, we were notified by the Department of Justice that we were awarded the grant, and the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, is the lead on that. And we look forward to having our kickoff meeting later this month or early October. Next slide. Back in June, the Fraternal Order of Police Chairman sent a letter to our General Manager and CEO outlining some requests that they would like to see the department and management take the lead on. The letter really focused on two things. One is hashtag 8can'twait, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then the other thing was these 5 bullets that you see listed here. So each one of these 5 bullets listed here is chaired by a deputy chief and co-chaired by a member selected by the FOP. The first one, the performance evaluation for officers. This is something we actually started addressing last year, shortly after I testified before DC City Council. We know we had to make some adjustments on the way we measure officers' performance. This panel meets every week and has taken the lead on recrafting our general order and really evaluating through input through the FOP on how can we measure the quality of work officers do, what they do, that they're competent in their job, they do their job effectively, efficiently. So getting away from how many arrests or citations an officer have issued, but more importantly, have they completed their paperwork on time? Have they appeared for court as required? Have they testified before court? Are they participating in community engagement meetings? Are they volunteering for other assignments? So we're looking at how can we measure officers' performance, not quantitative, but quality. So that program, or that committee rather, has made a lot of progress and continues to move forward. The next committee is the stop and frisk. One of the issues raised in the letter was stop and frisk and how you have a consensual encounter with a citizen versus a contact. So since the inception of that committee, we've issued 2 training bulletins reminding them, officers, of the stop and frisk components, whether it's Terry versus Ohio, whether it's Tennessee versus Garner, Graham versus Connor, key cases that the Supreme Court have passed rulings down on, and trying to just refresh officers on when they have a duty and obligation to run a wanted check on someone versus a contact with a citizen. And that's something I envision we're going to do probably quarterly or biannually to continue to release training level bulletins and not wait for mandatory in-service retraining every year to share that. The next one is de-escalation training. Law enforcement has been doing this for decades. The name has changed somewhat, but de-escalation training really is about conflict resolution, decision-making, defensive tactics, all of which our officers do every year. As part of the 6 pillars of the 21st century policing, in 2018, we launched Blue Courage, which was the changing the mindset of officers from the warrior mindset to the guardian mindset and the sanctity of life. And last year we did T3 training, which is tactics, trust, and how we build relationships within the community, And this year we focus on mental health and how do you recognize someone in mental health crisis? How do you respond to someone in mental health crisis? That was a focus here in 2020. And we're going to continue to do that de-escalation training. One thing that's important to note is the training that Metro Transit police officers receive must be equal to or exceed that of the jurisdictions which we police in. And that's written in the compact that we must meet those training standards by our respective partners here in the National Capital Region. The next group is the ethical policing and peer support. We just posted a memorandum for officers to volunteer to be part of that. Because it is a position, we have to announce it within the CBA guidelines. I'm pleased to report that the oral boards for become a member of that unit take place next week. We've identified training in Richmond, Virginia that we hope to send some people to in the fall once that list is finalized and formulated. We've also partnered with our partners here in the National Capital Region, pulling their policies and in the process of crafting a new general order and policy on what that looks like. And finally, the last group, the retaining, promoting, and recruitment. I am pleased to report, working with our HR department, we're part of the third-party vendor that has recently taken on some of our recruitment initiatives. We need some work here, so we're going to continue to do that. Marketing, branding, the Metro Transit Police. We're crafting a new landing page that people can visit. We're also going to put testimonials on there from officers and saying, I joined the Metro Transit Police because, and then a short snippet of why that officer joined and what makes it special to be a Metro Transit Police officer. We're also looking at using different social media platforms. We know that's a generation we need to latch onto and get their buy-in. So we're doing that as well. As a matter of information, year to date, we've hired 13 new police officers and 5 special police officers. Here, the 8 can't wait. This is something, the 5 listed here, the banning of choke codes, exhaust all the reasonable means before shooting, ban shooting and moving vehicles, requiring a use of force continuum, and comprehensive reporting. I'm pleased to report these have been in place with the Metro Transit Police, some for a couple of decades. Something that we've always had a practice of not doing. We don't authorize chokeholds, nor have we in 20 plus years. The exhaust other means before shooting, that's part of our use of force continuum. So if you picture an officer in the middle of a wagon wheel and he or she can use the force reasonable at the time. So that's something we train on every year. It's written in our policy. The same thing with banning and shooting at moving vehicles. We don't allow that. The only time an officer could shoot at a moving vehicle is a last resort or if someone is shooting at them. But they can't step in front of a stolen car, for example, and then use deadly force to stop the vehicle. You're not supposed to put yourself in harm's way, and that's written in our policy. The use of force continuum, what force an officer use is based on the threat that they're facing. So we go anywhere from just active voice, sir, ma'am, and you give that person direction to whether it's the OC spray, hands-on force, the ASP. I mean, there's all types of level of force, and we train on that every year. And then finally, comprehensive reporting. We compel our officers to complete a use of force statement each and every time they use force. And we take it a step farther. We actually require them anytime they handcuff a juvenile, person 18 years or younger, they're required to document a use of force. So separate from any paperwork, whether it's an arrest paperwork or a simple event report that's required, we require separate documentation through a use of force reporting tool. And we've been doing that for over 2 decades. The last 3 part of 8 can't wait on the next slide. This is something that we did in light of 8 can't wait. So we did not have a written directive on officers' duty to intervene. We now have a policy for an officer's duty to intervene. On June 3rd, we simply put that out in written memorandum format while we wait for our general order and our policy to catch up. So that's clear to every officer now, duty to intervene. And part of that was a duty to render aid as far as if you see an officer have someone in a compromising position, once that individual is subdued, put them in a recovery position, sit them up, and do what you have to do there. The other one is de-escalation training. We do this every year as part of our MIR. It's called defensive tactics or decision making or conflict resolution. We do this every year, and it's done throughout the entire police academy. Metro Transit police officers receive over 1,000 hours of training between the 3 academies, with a great emphasis on defensive tactics, on decision making, on use of force continuum, and all that comes together. And again, we're mandated to do certain elements each and every year through the state of Maryland or the Commonwealth of Virginia. And then the last one, require warning before shooting. We do not have that as a written policy at this time. It's something we do inadvertently. It's just kind of motor muscle reflex or motor memory. So we will look at updating our policy that says that, something to the point of maybe when feasible, officers will give a warning prior to shooting. And that's something we'll do going forward as we rewrite our policies. And then the last slide, when we talk about next steps, as I stated earlier, we're going to implement the investigation review panel. Hopefully the 4 civilians will be named today. We have the 3 law enforcement ones. We'll look for an opportunity between now and the end of the year to conduct the training that I spoke about. We're in the process of updating the landing page and adding those policies and practices to that landing page. The one thing I realized in June, I said, Lynn Bowersox and her team, Dan does a phenomenal job of keeping, this board informed and our elected officials informed and the riders and the citizens in the National Capital Region. So I said, one of the things I had on my next steps in June was to hire or assign a public information officer just through the transit police. But after, speaking to colleagues in the region and Dan and his team, I'm really going to make that a community engagement officer / a Dan Stessel, for lack of a better word. So we're in the process of writing that job description now. Hope to post it here in the near future and have that person on board before the end of the year or no later than January to help begin as part of that transformation that we're making and improving our relationships across the communities in which we serve. And the last is continue to brand the Metro Transit Police. And one of the ways we're going to do that is through Bridge the Gap at WMATA.com and advertise this through social media platforms where riders and anybody who chooses would like to reach out to the transit police, they'll be able to do so via this email. Chair Smedberg, that's my presentation this time. Be happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that presentation. We'll go around if people have questions or comments for the Chief. Ms. Gideby.
Chief, I appreciate your leadership. It's been a journey since I originally first started and joined the board. I really appreciate your leadership and really taking the helm and leading us as to how we offer a proactive approach to engaging with residents of the region and our customers overall. I wanted you to just offer a little bit more context for the community engagement and the youth piece the office that you set up for the youth. Why are you focusing on the youth, just so that folks have an understanding?
Yeah, so thank you for that question, ma'am. We are unique. We are the DC's, school bus, for lack of a better word. So it's important when you have that many youth, 50,000, give or take, once schools come back, engaging with our everyday riders. So balancing, youth behavior with our everyday riders and making sure they know it's not about security all the time. It's also about their individual safety. Metro is an inherently dangerous place. All the services are pretty hard. Innocent horseplay, you could unfortunately end up on a track bed and end up in a really bad situation. So we don't go about it all with law enforcement. We also touch on that safety component. And really, it's through your Respect Your Ride campaign. That program's been in place for several years now. And getting out in front of these schools and participating in school assemblies and school events and outreach activities where we say, hey, we understand you've been in school all day. We were all young at one time or another, and you've been in that classroom, school environment for 8 to 10 hours, and it's kind of unleashed all that energy you have. Just don't do it on the Metro. When you do, because, human being, it is natural to do that. But here's just some certain behaviors we just want you to follow and adhere to. And it's about their own individual safety and the security of our other riders. So we have a big focus on that just because the number of youth that use the Metro Rail system, both in the District of Columbia and Prince George's County.
One of the other things that we spent some time talking about is just the culture shift, because as someone who uses Metro, the first engagement often with a police officer shouldn't be through enforcement, but more so just through everyday engagement. So I'm encouraged to see some of the proactive pop-ups that you've set up. How are you continuing to support the culture shift? So you gave some policy overviews that you all are doing. I appreciate seeing the marketing campaign. I'm excited that Dan is a verb as to being able to find someone who can multitask and engage with the community proactively. But internally, can you talk a little bit more about the culture shift with your officers and how you all are kind of thinking about the engagement of how you speak to, the riders, especially in part because we are the ones who are relying on them every day when we see them.
Yes, so it's really two-pronged approach there. One is having that community engagement officer help tell her story. You know, the men and women of this police department do a lot of good work each and every day, and that story is not often told or portrayed maybe. So doing that, I think, will get the buy-in from the community and help build those levels of trust that we need. And then the second is just being as transparent and as open as possible. You know, we continue to push our leadership team here to have conversation with officers. We have multiple roll calls every day where it's an opportunity for that first line supervisor to engage with the officers, mid-level management. I address roll call as often as I can, and as well as just training. We got to continue to focus on the training, the best practices, whether it's the ICP or the Police Executive Research Forum or the Major City Chiefs of Police Committee. There's so many committees out there. There's so much information out there. And it's important that we continue to serve with those best practices and stay level and competitive with the National Capital Region as far as training and policies go. And then comes back to recruitment, engagement. I mean, it's just so many pieces to that. Because this profession is being strained right now with everything going on. And that's part of that recruitment piece, but part of that is that marketing branding piece and building that trust with the community so people want to be part of WMATA and be part of the Metro Transit Police. So it's not a quick fix, ma'am. It's something that's going to take some time and definitely will need support from this board and elected officials in the region to make it happen.
Yeah. And then my final piece is really around just the COPS grant that you were able to be awarded. So you talked a little bit more about it being one to identify kind of best practices. What is actually, how much money was it? What is it that you would actually be getting as part of it? Or what would the agency?
So it's called the Collaborative Reform Initiative that was launched by the COPS grant through the Department of Justice. So you were limited to what you could ask for. So we asked for two things. We asked for assistance on community engagement and specifically with youth engagement. So what they're going to do, provide us technical assistance, whether it's best practices, take a look at our current policies, but tips and strategies on how to build positive relationships across the community. So the ICP is the lead on that. They had a changing of command internally within their organization, and COVID caused it to be delayed a little bit. So I don't know more than that at this time, but it will kick off. We have a kickoff meeting, I believe either next week or the first week of October, and I'll be able to provide more information after that.
Okay. And then overall, again, I just want to thank you for your leadership and also the FOP leadership for being able to identify new ways to also engage in this conversation during this time. I think it is very hard. And I think even as for the profession, but even as customers and riders, you know, and I think there should be more opportunities for us to engage in a positive and proactive way, not in a time of enforcement. So I appreciate your leadership in trying to find new ways. I also appreciate your leadership on wanting to help us to get to a place on the board where we could be able to have a two-way conversation around the policies. I think about February and the conversations that were coming out around enforcement and around, separate from even the conversations that the district was having at the council level, and wanting to be able to have some sort of transparency in our process and a look back to make sure that we were making the best decisions. And at that time, even the conversation around having civilians participate in the conversation was one where we weren't there yet. So to see the evolution, to see that we're getting ready to appoint new members to that new force and to hear what you're planning to do in the next couple of weeks, I'm deeply encouraged by your leadership to date. So thank you so much for all that you've done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gideby. Mr. Goldman?
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. A very comprehensive report. No questions that I look forward to moving forward on the investigation panel with all the names announced, hopefully by the end of today, and that you could get them all aboard by the end of the month or earlier in October and get the panel moving. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Mr. Horner?
I have no questions, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Alternate Director Alcorn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to also thank the chief and also wanted to encourage as much as we can, and the chief referred to this, I think already, that there are a lot of changes going on across police departments in the region. And I do want to make sure that that we stay up with that, because things are changing, and I know we're changing here as well, and appreciate everything the chief's doing along those lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alcorn. Mr. Meridian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions.
Thank you. Secretary Slater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to say thank you to the chief for his leadership on these issues. I know it's not an easy road, and he's definitely putting in the work as well as the whole force. So thank you.
Thank you. And Director McMillan.
Similarly, no questions. And I also would like to compliment the chief on his leadership and a helpful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. And I too, Chief Pavlik, want to express my appreciation for your work on this and all the other people that are engaged in this effort as well. I know it's not just one person, and it's throughout your organization. So appreciate that work. All right, thank you. Chief, any last comments?
No, I appreciate your all support. Thank you very much.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
Next, we have appointments to the Metro Transit Police Department's Investigation Review Panel. The Metro Board recently conducted a recruitment effort for 4 positions on the advisory body and received nearly 70 applications. And I want to thank everyone who applied, and I also want to acknowledge the work of our Board Secretary, Jennifer Ellison, and the Deputy Board Secretary, John Pasick, and help with this effort going through all those applications. We appreciate the opportunity to hear everyone's ideas on ways the MTPD can promote equity and fairness and improve its investigation process. Now I would like to move appointment of the following people to the panel. Chantal Fuller for the District of Columbia, Sheila Williams for Maryland, Don Knuckles for Virginia, and Electra Balatis as the at-large member. Is there a second?
I'll second, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Meridian. There's a second. Is there any discussion? Ms. Gideby, we'll go down the line.
I just wanted to say thank you to the board for being able to really put forward this idea and supporting and working with management on this. I think now more than ever, being able to make sure that there is a body, an independent body that can work both with the board and management to have the discussions around our policies and really think about how we are ensuring that we are providing the best services and that we're thinking about how MTPD can show up to support the region is critical. And so I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the leadership, and of course the general manager for making sure that we could get to this place. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goldman.
No questions, no comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Horner.
No questions or comments from me as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Alcorn.
Nothing for me.
Thank you. Mr. Meridian.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary Slater.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. McMillan.
No questions.
And I also want to acknowledge the work that the board members put into this, interviewing folks and going through all the applications. It did take time, obviously, and I think we ended up with a good group of folks. So hearing no further discussion, Ms. Ellison, please conduct the vote.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby,
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman,
Aye.
Director Horner,
Aye.
Alternate Director Alcorn,
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian,
Aye.
Director Slater,
Aye.
and Director McMillan.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. And we welcome all the new panel members, and we look forward to working with you very much. Thank you. And finally, as you know, last week, the board approved a public hearing for the proposed amendments to the FY 2021 budget. Before I get to the remarks on the public outreach process, I'll note that at last week's special board meeting, I inadvertently omitted my colleague, Secretary Slater, from the discussion. So I would like to publicly apologize for that and give him an opportunity to make any public statements that he would like to make on that proposal. You know, Greg, your experience and thoughtfulness throughout this entire process has been invaluable, I know, to me, and I know others. So really do apologize for that, and want to give you this opportunity to make any comments on that proposal.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for just a few minutes here. I just wanted to offer a few comments on the budget because it's just such an important topic. This budget that we're all dealing with, not only in WMATA, but across the state and across the country, even in our local governments, is very complex and very challenging. We at MDOT just released our draft 6-year plan, and our 6-year plan is $2.9 billion less than the previous year plan that we released just 9 months ago. I can tell you that I was in the planning director seat during the Great Recession, and one of the tasks that I had was to rebuild our budget at that time, and that was about 1/3 of what we're dealing with today. It's very challenging. That being said, the impacts to transit programs across the nation are just impactful and really, really challenging. When I look at what I'm seeing across the country, Denver is dealing with layoffs and huge cuts. LA Metro is dealing with layoffs and cuts. New York MTA is looking at service cuts at around 40%. And that's all if we do not get some additional funding to help us deal with some of these budgets. And I know we're all working hard to work with our federal partners on trying to help with some of that backstop funding. But I did just want to take the opportunity to stress how important that funding is, not only for WMATA, but for our transit systems across the country and our transportation and our government programs across the entire country. So I just wanted to not miss an opportunity to make that point. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Thank you, Secretary Slater. We appreciate your comments. As a reminder to our customers and stakeholders, the public comment period for the FY21 budget amendment docket opens this Saturday. Please visit wamata.com/budget to take the survey and learn how to participate in our virtual public hearing scheduled for October 13th. I understand from next item here, I understand my colleagues from DC would like to address the Title VI analysis as it relates to the FY21 budget amendment process. And before I turn the floor over, I would like to note that even though the Federal Transit Administration has officially waived the Title VI equity analysis for all transit agencies during the pandemic public health emergency, Metro will be conducting an equity analysis that very closely resembles a full Title VI analysis. The board will receive this data as part of its decision-making process on the proposed FY21 budget amendments. I'll now turn the floor over to Ms. Gideby and Mr. Marudian for their comments. Stephanie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is my understanding that the authority plans to do a compact public hearing, but not a full Title VI analysis. This is concerning to me, especially during this time, especially as we have sat through a presentation on the impact of what Title VI means in terms of making sure that we are not excluding anyone from participation and that we are not denying the benefits. Although this administration has chosen not to require a Title VI analysis, which is, for me, the base, the minimum that you can do to ensure that you are not doing any disparate harms or causing any disparate burdens to communities. I think that it is a missed opportunity to ensure that we still follow the laws. The Title VI analysis comes from the Civil Rights Acts of 1964. Millions of people have protested, have given their lives to ensure that they could be part of a conversation. And while I appreciate and understand that the general manager and the leadership team will still conduct their own version of it, I believe that it is critical for us to ensure that we still follow the laws. And while I understand that it is not illegal because it's waived, just because this administration is choosing to waive the rights of people doesn't mean that this authority should follow those pieces. And I would hope that our board would really ensure that we consider all of these pieces during this time, now that more than ever, when we fully understand that those who are most transit dependent are the ones who ride Metro Rail. Those who are the most protected class under Title VI are the ones who have to rely on Metro Bus. Those who need us the most during this time, as we are thinking about our budget impacts, that this board would take this data and this information that is typically required, and while I understand that the FTA is not requiring you to do it, which is a baseline of ensuring that we are not discriminating, that we are not ensuring disparate impacts, that we would raise our standards a little bit higher. And I appreciate the leadership. I think that this board meeting, more than any board meeting, truly reflects all the work that we have been doing over the last few weeks. But I think to be able to take the pass and then not publicly explain that we are not going to fully conduct a Title VI analysis as we are preparing to go to public comment is problematic. And so I hope that we will find a way to ensure that not only do we take the analysis that will be done, and while I appreciate that an analysis will be done, maybe not to the same standards as what is required by FTA, typically outside of the pandemic, that we would still consider those factors. And while I truly understand that these are times that we've never seen before, I think now more than ever, when we fully understand who's most reliant on this system, we should not meet the minimum standards. We should go above and beyond to ensure that whatever service we provide truly considers the least of these, those who are most dependent on our service, to ensure that we're making the best decision for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gideby. Mr. Meridian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question following my colleague's remarks for the general manager or a member of his team, which is, can you please explain the distinction between the full analysis and what the staff is conducting?
This is
We
Paul
also have
Wiedefeld.
Go ahead,
Chairman.
Paul.
I'm sorry, this is Paul Wiedefeld, General Manager. I was going to ask Tom Webster, because he's already done some work to date, and also what and what would go forward. So let him explain that, and then we'll be glad to take any questions after that.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So as it is correct that FTA has waived the full Title VI equity analysis requirement for temporary service reductions due to the public health emergency. But during that time, Metro has continued to perform our analysis of ridership and of proposed service changes using the same methodology we follow under normal conditions, and consistent with FTA's recommendations that transit agencies document the rationale for specific service reductions and take steps to ensure equitable service reductions. Staff will present the results of that analysis to the board. The primary difference between the approach under the FTA waiver and our normal full Title VI equity analysis is a modified public participation process due to the pandemic and the financial crisis and some of the challenges that my colleague Lynn discussed earlier this morning. So in developing the FY21 service reduction proposal, staff considered the equity impacts and performed preliminary reviews of the options under consideration. The preliminary analysis of the proposal that was adopted by the board last week for public hearing did not show a disparate impact on minority customers or a disproportionate burden on low-income customers. Again, the primary difference here is in the public participation and the speed with which the board moves forward with these actions.
Thanks, Tom. Do you have a sense of when that analysis would be available to be presented to the board?
So there are essentially two pieces here. There's the analysis of the preliminary analysis of the proposal as it's gone out to public hearing, and then there will be an analysis at the end just before the board makes the decision on the service changes. We plan to provide the board with the preliminary analysis very soon. That work is done. We are completing the report. And then, as we get closer to November and the board's decisions, we'll have the follow-on, sort of final report on the equity impacts.
Thanks. So in addition to, so it's fair to say, correct me if I'm wrong, that the public engagement, public comment component is the one area that would not really mirror what a full process would otherwise look like if not for the pandemic.
That's correct.
And just so I'm clear, will that analysis be presented to us prior to the public hearing?
Yes, I believe so. The preliminary analysis of the proposal. Yes.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks. I don't have any further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Marudian. Now I'll open it up if anyone else would like to make a comment or have any questions, Mr. Goldman.
And just wanted to follow up with Tom Webster and drill down on the preliminary analysis that will be presented pursuant to the questions of Mr. Marudian. Tom, will the preliminary analysis drive down on the Metro bus to the route level and on Metro rail to the line level so that your assessment would tell us whether there are individual routes that may be close to a disparate impact for minority and low income riders, and do the same for Metro rail on a line by line assessment?
So there are one clarification, and then we'll provide some information. So the Title VI equity analysis is performed at the mode level. So at bus as a mode and rail as a mode. That's where the calculation at the aggregate level is performed. Certainly to do that, we have to go route by route, line by line, and assess the impacts. But the analysis is at the top level. We will be able to provide the board with route level information about customer demographics and ridership.
So I guess I'm asking you to be a little clearer. So will we know what the ridership levels are on a route by route basis and how those compared with pre-COVID levels, and the same for the various rail lines?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Mr. Horner, any questions or comments?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Mr. Alcorn?
Nothing from me.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary Slater?
No further question, but I will take a moment and support the comments made by my fellow board member, Ms. Gideby, the importance of this Title VI analysis in what we do. And I look forward to seeing the work that's done when we get the budget decisions in front of us.
Thank you. Mr. McMillan?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you, everyone. And before we turn it over to General Manager Wiedefeld, I understand the ACC report video is ready.
Good morning and welcome back. Our written report is quite long, covering the events in July and August, as well as recent events in September. We hope that you'll enjoy reading it. On a sad note, we lost Charlie Crawford to cardiovascular disorders in September. Charlie was an effective transportation advocate for the blind community and an Access for All representative to the AAC. Currently, he was leading the safety suggestions for floating bus stops in Montgomery County. We hope to honor his work this year along with a fellow blind former AAC member and Bus Rail Subcommittee Chair Brian Miller, who is also active with the Alexandria Disability Group, who passed away from COVID complications in March. Staff was effectively discussed movement on developing the new fare gates, scooter hubs, and the design of the new Metro Access van. The discussions were thorough, and our suggestions have been incorporated whenever possible. We're hoping that the final design of the new Metro Access vans to be purchased next year might be adopted through APTA as a standard for the industry. This month, We're updated on the latest safety issues by Ms. Impestato. We'll also follow up on our continuing request to participate in safety exercises without having to sign waivers, indemnifying Metro for any damage that is done to us or our equipment. She explained that it was an insurance issue for WMATA, and we continue to request that WMATA find a way to reimburse participants for damages that may arise from participating in these safety exercises, damages to their wheelchairs or mobility devices or to themselves. We also received updates on progress made toward improving Metro Access software issues with scheduling, Ps, and ranger function. We were also told that the very successful Abilities Ride service was going to be suspended temporarily due to the current reduction in Metro Access ridership. Since Metro Access ridership is so low, there was no reason to have people move over to another form of transportation. Ms. Kotrakova presented an overview of the summer Metro Rail projects and its successes. Very impressive work in a very short period of time. We look forward to using the new facilities now that they're available. Current and future bus service planning was presented by Mr. Hamry and discussed in depth by the AAC. Following our discussion, 2 customers gave impassioned presentations about their reduced bus service that currently exists and the reduction in bus service that is proposed for both Fairfax County and the DuPont Circle area. We suggested that they come directly to the board to let you all know their needs. We hope that the proposed hearings that you just scheduled this week will be a platform for this. We believe these hearings should be fully accessible, both as separate Zoom meetings for each jurisdiction and an accessible mechanism for those without internet access, or bus route locale, or a rail station nearby to leave their comments. The AAC has always used the initials SAS as their code: safe, accessible, and sustainable. These all have become a challenge for WMATA during the pandemic. In addition to discussing these issues at the AAC, our leadership has attended the recent RAC meetings for their discussions, as well as listening to the board meetings on these issues. I'm sure you will hear more about this from the RAC report, which follows me. WMATA has been working hard to stay safe, but there is a difficult decision facing the board in reinstituting front door bus boarding in order to collect fares. This may raise money, but it may also increase the risk to drivers and passengers, as well as reduce ridership due to the fear of COVID. It is a difficult decision, but along the lines of Mr. Goldman's thoughts at the recent Finance Committee meeting about the proposed red line turnback adjustments, how much money is worth the cost to employees and riders in order to gain more money for WMATA? Finally, these are difficult times requiring difficult decisions, required to maintain safe, accessible, and sustainable service. But with WMATA's good communication to the public, the AAC will do everything you ask to help. To this end, we invite any and all board members and WMATA staff to attend and participate in our Zoom AAC, Bus Rail Subcommittee, and Metro Access Subcommittee meetings to give us some direction and help us to help you. Thank you so much for listening, and have a good rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Posner. Always appreciate the work of you and your committee. And of your colleagues, unfortunate thing. So sorry to hear about that. Anyway, that concludes my report. Now we'll turn the floor over to the General Manager, Paul Wiedefeld, for his report. Mr. Wiedefeld.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Paul Wiedefeld, the General Manager. First, I wanted to thank the board, the FOP, and then the chief for the work they've been doing in the last few months. on these police initiatives that I think are so important that we've committed to. So I think the actions taken today are very important, and we can keep going in that direction that we all want to go. Today, what I wanted to do is actually have a fairly detailed presentation on the COVID-19 recovery plan update. I think just given the dynamics of what's happening in the community, obviously how it impacts the health of our employees, how our customers are feeling, and then also the implications that then has on the budget. So I've asked Tom Webster to put together a formal presentation on that I'd like him to walk through now, if he would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Weefeld. For today's recovery plan update, I'm joined by a few of our colleagues for the presentation, and we will begin with our Chief Safety Officer, Teresa.
Good afternoon. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to impact the National Capital Region, which Metro provides essential bus, rail, and paratransit services. Today's presentation will provide an update on Metro's recovery plan, which will address our safety mitigations, our communications with our customers and stakeholders in the region, our service levels, capital programs, and our financial performance. Some state-level movement to phase 3 of the reopening plans has occurred, which continues to encourage social distancing and facial covering requirements, with some businesses operating at limited capacity. Regional jurisdictions continue in phase 2. The federal government continues to permit telework flexibility, and local school districts are currently engaging in virtual learning. Metro will continue our coordination with states and regional jurisdictions to ensure that we are in alignment with reopening plans and guidance. Throughout the evolution of the pandemic, Metro has placed the safety of our employees and customers at the forefront of every decision we have made. We have no greater objective than continuing to provide our customers a safe service and our employees a safe workspace. We have implemented numerous mitigations to address conditions on the system, which align with the guidance issued by the CDC, including requiring facial coverings for employees and customers, encouraging social distancing for customers, and continuing our extensive cleaning and disinfection protocols, as well as operational changes, including increased service beginning in August, operating all trains with 8 cars to maximize opportunities for social distancing, and launching contactless fare payment for rail and bus customers. Metro's 12,300 employee workforce represents a diverse cross-section of the communities we proudly serve. Metro has received 2,032 COVID-19 related reports from employees. These reports include employees who have been placed on precautionary quarantine due to close contact with an infected individual. Of these reports, 1,864 have been returned to work. To date, 354 Metro employees have tested positive for COVID-19. Of these cases, 330 have returned to work. 1 employee is currently hospitalized, and Metro reported the tragic loss of one of our employees in August. My colleague Lynn Bowersox will now review Metro's customer communication efforts.
Thanks, Teresa. So the next phase of our public education campaign begins in a couple of weeks with messages that are very focused on our cleaning and disinfection efforts, our capacity and plenty of room for social distancing on our buses and on our trains, and the requirement that all employees and passengers wear facial coverings. These are things that we know are of concern to our riders, and they want to be reassured about when choosing to make trips on Metro. We recently launched, as Teresa said, the Smart Trip app. And since the chairman asked me this question earlier, our crack staff have advised that approximately 25,000 customers have availed themselves of the new mobile fare payment options. So that gives you a sense of the level of early adoption of the new touchless fare payment methodology. And I would just say to any customer who's listening, never again do you need to touch a fare machine. Those vending machines in the rail system can be a thing of the past if you want to use your phone instead. We are going to do everything possible through this campaign and through all of our communications to reassure our customers and make them feel comfortable while traveling. But we do know from our continued survey work with our customers that the needle will only move so much because there are so many who no longer need to make the same daily travel that they did pre-COVID. And as one example of that, our most recent research wave shows that of the customers who were taking trains to work at least one day a week before March, 12% of them now find themselves unemployed. 88% who continue to have work no longer need to ride the system in order to be at work. And of those, only 4% said they expect to ride more in this calendar year. So again, we need to do everything we can to educate our customers and earn their confidence, but there are only so many who need to travel for work purposes. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Lynn. My name is Joe Leader. I am the Executive Vice President, Chief Operating Officer here at Washington Metro. As stated before, our managed reentry service plan went into effect in August. August 16th, rail entered into the managed reentry service first, followed by bus, which followed 7 days later on August 23rd. In terms of our Metro bus service, our plans on both bus and rail, we anticipated about 80% availability of our workforce, being that we're still in a pandemic time. And that's based on not only the people who test positive, but we have other employees who are out quarantined because of close contact, as well as some that are still out sick. So for Metro bus service, our span of hours is from 4 a.m. to 12 a.m. Our weekday service was at is about 73% of pre-COVID service. And being that we were able to realign our workforce and use them more effectively, we were able to get rid of the weekend lifeline service that we provided. And today we are at 87% pre-COVID service on Saturdays and 86% pre-COVID service on Sundays. And again, we continue with our rear door boarding and we are collecting no fares. And we are seeing some overcrowding on some lines, and what our planning teams are doing are using the extra board that we created in order to help mitigate that overcrowding. And we're seeing it differently. Some lines you get it all day, some lines you may just get it in the AM, and some lines you may just see them in the PM. In terms of our Metro Rail service, we are operating currently at about 90% pre-COVID service. Our weekday service runs from 5 a.m. To 11 a.m. We have increased our train frequency, and at this time, I'm happy to report that all our stations are open, including the stations that were closed for the platform work that we accelerated in the capital program. And again, as Lynn mentioned, we have a new mobile fare payment now available that will help our customers to be touchless. And I would like to thank you and turn this over to Dennis Anasiki.
Thank you, Joe. My name is Dennis Anasiki, Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer for Metro. As the chairman mentioned a little bit ago, Metro continues to walk through the financial challenges brought about by the pandemic with the engagement and support of the board. But as I noted to the board in July, Metro's preliminary year-end report shows a balanced operating budget for fiscal year 2020, based on the replacement of operating revenues lost due to COVID-19 with federal CARES Act funds. So for the fiscal year, Metro provided 230.6 million trips, which is 23% below budget. As a result, fare revenues for the fiscal year was also below budget, but by $191 million. But most of that drop off in revenue occurred in the fourth quarter of the fiscal year. Overall, operating revenue for the year totaled $802 million, including $221 million that came from the CARE Act funds. With respect to expenses, Metro's operating expenses for fiscal year 2020 was $1.93 billion, with the operating subsidy for the region at $1.126 billion. Switching to fiscal year, next slide, Tom. Switching to fiscal year 2021, Metro provided 5.1 million trips in July of 2020, which is 34% better than budget. July's ridership reflected a higher rebound on bus, due in part to the suspension of fare collection on Metro Bus. For the month, ridership on Metro Bus was 3.4 million. Ridership on Metro Rail was 1.6 million, while Metro Access provided 77 trips for the month. All of these numbers are below prior year levels by 80.6% on Metro Bus, 90.3% on Metro Rail, and 62% on Metro Access. So as a result of the low ridership on the system and the suspension of fare collections on Metro Bus, total operating revenues was $87 million in July, with $80 million of that coming from the ACTS recovery funds. Finally, Metro spent $159 million in July, which is $14.5 million below budget, again, due to lower expenses in materials, services, and some other cost groups. As a result, Metro ended the month with a net operating position that was positive as we continue to walk through the rest of the pandemic impacts on the organization. I'll turn it over to Tom.
Thank you, Dennis. Metro is continuing to focus our capital program and capital budget investment in safety, reliability, and state of good repair projects and programs. After many initial delays to projects and programs in the spring due to supply chain delays, manufacturing shutdowns, and the changes to project delivery to adapt to the risks of COVID-19. Most projects and programs have now resumed, and Metro has accelerated safety and state of good repair programs, including the platform reconstruction program during this period of low rail ridership. About $1.7 billion was invested last fiscal year in FY20, and our forecast for FY21, the current fiscal year, is approximately $1.9 billion. We have also deferred approximately $30 million of projects that will not have an impact on safety or state of good repair goals in order to preserve some financial resources. And looking ahead at activities over the next 90 days, next month we'll have the public hearings on the FY21 service changes with board decisions in November. We'll also be kicking off the FY22 budget process with updates next month, followed by the proposed budget, and then the initiation of the public hearing and public participation process. And of course, we will continue to prepare for the presidential inaugurations and events around the inauguration. That concludes our update this morning, or this afternoon. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is Paul Wiedefeld.
Paul.
Again, General Manager. Before I open it up to questions, I also think it's very important to recognize the partnership we've had with our unions across the board in dealing with what we've been dealing with, in the last 6 months plus, but also in our thinking going forward. We are holding regular meetings with them to work through issues, first and foremost on the safety of all the employees, but more importantly, or just as importantly, how do we start to deal with this financial crisis that we all have to deal with? And it has to be all of us at the table working together on this. So I just wanted to thank them publicly because they have been working really shoulder to shoulder with us on these issues. And I believe that will lead us eventually to something that is beneficial as best we can within the financial constraints that we're working under. So with that, I'd be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wiedefeld, appreciate that. And to Mr. Webster, Mr. Anoseki, Mr. Leader, for the presentation here today. Obviously a very important issue for us as we try to manage this very difficult situation. So let's open it up to questions. I'm going to mix it up a little bit. I'm going to give Mr. McMillan the first crack at questions here. He's always at the end, and being chair of the Finance Committee, I thought I'd give him the first opportunity here. Mr. McMillan?
Well, that's kind of you, Mr. Chairman, but I don't have any questions at this time.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Ms. Gideby?
I don't have any questions at this time.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Goldman?
Thank you. I won't keep the tradition going. During the public participation section earlier, you heard from a number of riders, residents of Montgomery County. One of the big issues they raised was the turnbacks and the red line. I hope we'll hear from them again during the public participation period next month. And the board will have to make a final decision on that in November. And so what they have to say is very important, very relevant. And my position on that is very clear. The other issue that was raised by some in the public participation was the cleaning and disinfecting practices and policies that WMATA is implementing for rail cars and buses. And I want to give the general manager an opportunity to address that issue. The questioner, at least one of them, made reference to what's being done with the MTA in New York, where rail cars are disinfected every day, according to their statements, literature. So I just want to give the general manager an opportunity to say what is the level of cleaning and disinfecting of metro rail cars and buses, and to assure the travelers that these rail cars and buses are clean and safe, as well as we can make them for use by our riders.
Sure. Mr. Goldman, this is Paul Wiedefeld, the general manager. I'll have Joe Leader go into a little bit more detail, but just as an overview, we go beyond just rail cars and buses. We actually do our stations. We do things with our escalators and things of that sort. And we have a formal process that we're doing. We also react to if there's any cases within any of our facilities where we go in, for instance, at a bus division, if someone was sick or has contracted the virus, for instance, we go in and do work there as well. So it is much more than what people will be seeing. They will see it quite a bit as well, but it is a concerted effort that has been going on now for literally months. So Joe, can you give a little bit more details on the program that you've set in place?
Sure. There's basically two types of cleaning that we do. We do cleaning with in-house forces, and we do cleaning with a third party that we've hired. All our buses and all our rail cars are cleaned on a daily basis, and the concentration of the cleaning is on the touch surfaces. Okay, that handrails, seats, window ledges, all that. That is what the main cleaning is. We also use an electrostatic fogger that's done by in-house forces, as well as when we have, as the general manager mentioned, we have a positive or a presumptive positive case. We'll take that vehicle out of service, bring a third party in, and clean the interior of that car that we identified. If we can't identify the car, we clean the entire train. As the general manager mentioned, we clean our stations. Our custodians doing the touch surfaces throughout their tour of duty, as well as we bring in the third party. Every station has been hit at least once, being that we've had some presumptive positives or positives with our employees. We identify where they had worked the day before when we find out, and we go and we shut those stations down. We bring a third party in, and the entire station is cleaned. So there is a lot of cleaning that is going on. Just to mention, we began installing the ultralight on the handrails of our escalators, although it will help reduce the germs, but we are doing additional things now than prior to pre-COVID than we used to do.
Thank you. I hope that's a responsive answer, and the riders, and prior riders and people who will ride again will feel that level of comfort that they can ride in safely on Metro Rail and Metro Bus, and that our cars and buses and trains are cleaned and disinfected on a daily basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Mr. Horner?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Alcorn?
No questions.
Mr. Marudian?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary Slater?
No questions. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Wiedefeld and Mr. Leader, Mr. Aniseki, Mr. Webster. Is there anything else on your report?
No, sir. No, Mr. Chairman, this is Paul Wiedefeld. No, that completes the report.
All right. Thank you so much. All right, now I'll Steve, you're on mute. Are you?
No, actually,
There
you
you go.
froze for just a minute. I assume you're calling on me, though.
Yes.
Thank you. So the following item was referred to the board at the September 10th Finance and Capital Committee meeting. Approval of public hearing staff report for parking changes at Grosvenor Strathmore Station. Staff sought approval for 3 actions related to the proposed joint development at the new Carrollton Metro Rail Station. Mr. Chairman, I would like to move the following 3 actions. Approval of the compact public hearing staff report for changes to parking at Grosvenor Strathmore Station. Amend the mass transit plan to reduce the surface parking at Grosvenor Strathmore Station by approximately 196 spaces. And authorization for the general manager, chief executive officer to determine the exact number of the reduction of surface parking spaces. Mr. Chairman, I move approval.
Thank you, Steve. So there's a motion has been made. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Mr. Marudian. Now we'll go around for any discussion or comments. Ms. Gideby?
No comments at this time.
Mr. Goldman?
No comments.
Mr. Horner?
No comments.
Mr. Alcorn?
No comments.
Mr. Marudian?
No comments.
Secretary Slater?
No comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. McMillan. All right. No further comments. I'll ask Ms. Ellison to do a roll call vote.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby,
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman,
Aye.
Director Horner,
Aye.
Alternate Director Alcorn,
Aye.
Alternate Director Marudian,
Aye.
Director Slater,
Aye.
Director McMillan.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison.
That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan. Appreciate the work of you and your committee on all of this. Next, we'll move to the report by the Executive Committee. Now, for my report for the Executive Committee, the following item was referred to the board at this morning's Executive Committee meeting. The 2020 Title VI update. Staff sought approval of 2020 update to Metro's Title VI plan, which is required by the Federal Transit Administration, including the results of the 2020 service monitoring analysis under system-wide service standards and policies. Following approval, the updated plan will be submitted to the FDA. I move approval of this item. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Gideby. Again, we'll go around for any comments or questions. Ms. Gideby?
No comments at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Goldman?
Nothing further. Thank you.
Mr. Horner?
No comments.
Mr. Alcorn?
No comments.
Mr. Marudian?
No questions or comments. Thank you.
Secretary Slater?
No comments. Thank you.
And Mr. McMillan?
Comments, thank you.
Thank you. With no further comments, Ms. Ellison, please conduct the vote.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby,
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman,
Aye.
Director Horner,
Aye.
Alternate Director Alcorn,
Aye.
Alternate Director Marudian,
Aye.
Director Slater,
Aye.
and Director McMillan.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Next, we'll move to the consent item. We have one consent item before us today. The virtual Smart Trip card fee waiver. Staff seeks board authorization to waive the fee for the virtual smart card for a period of 6 months. I'd like to move approval of this. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Meridian. Does anyone have any comments or questions on this item?
No.
Not. Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby,
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman,
Aye.
Director Horner,
Aye.
Alternate Director Alcorn,
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian,
Aye.
Director Slater,
Aye.
Director McMillan.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Now we'll have reports by the jurisdictions, NVTC. Mr. Alcorn, anything you'd like to report? I don't have anything.
Yeah, I don't have anything today.
Okay. Ms. Gideby for the district?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goldman for WSTC?
Nothing to report today. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Horner for the federal government?
Nothing. Thank you.
Okay. So with no further business to come before the board, we'll stand adjourned, and I will make a motion for executive session. In accordance with the bylaws, I, Paul Smedberg, request that the board of directors convene an executive session to discuss the following matters pursuant to Article 2, Paragraph 9, subsections A, budgetary matters that may affect legal positions, WMATA contracts, or sensitive relationships with local jurisdictions or the federal government, and C, personnel or labor issues, including discussions of labor contracts or labor negotiations, consideration or interviews of candidates for employment, and the assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, or resignation of individuals, and D, contractual or other matters, including confidential or proprietary concerns, or the investment of public funds where discussion in public would affect the public or the financial interest of WMATA, and F, safety and security matters where premature release would compromise public safety. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Seconded by Mr. Goldman. We have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. We will convene an executive session. Why don't we go ahead and reconvene in 5 minutes to give people a break and gather their papers for the exec session. Thank you.